Hi everybody, and warmly welcome to Nordic Welfare Center and this webinar on revealing hidden potentials. My name is Maria Kreutz. I am responsible for the deafblind issue here at NVC, and I will guide you through this afternoon together, and I will tell you something more about it soon. But first, I will hand over to my colleague Nina Steens. She will give you some technical and practical information.
Hi everybody, I'm your technical host today, and I will give you just a few technical things to think about. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, as you can see by the red small dot that is blinking. And we aim to publish it on our YouTube channel afterwards, at least parts of it. Please ask us questions throughout the webinar. You can do it by clicking on the Q&A function, which you can see in the toolbar. Written interpretation will be available throughout the webinar as well. You can activate it by clicking on the CC closed caption button in the toolbar as well. And you can choose the size of the interpretation or the texting on subtitle settings and size. If you have any technical challenges or questions, please ask them in the Q&A function, and I will do my very best to answer and help you. As a participant, you will not be able to activate your sound and your picture, so no worry about that. The chat function is not in use for you participants, but we will distribute some links through the chat function, but you won't be able to answer us. That's all from me. I will give the word back to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. And as Nina said, you can ask questions, and we will take the last 10 minutes of this day for answering them. And then we have 20 minutes tomorrow afternoon. So if we can't handle every question today, we can put them forward until tomorrow. Here we are at Nordic Welfare Center, and this is an institution under the Nordic Council of Ministers. We're working with social issues, welfare policy, integration, public health, and disability issues. And under the disability issues, we have deafblind issues. And in our field, we have networks, projects, courses, and webinars like now. Many webinars, not so many physical courses, of course. One network is on cognition, and we will talk a little bit later more about that. You can follow us on Facebook. We have also a newsletter that you can sign up on. We have it in English as well. There you can get information about all our arrangements and so on. In this cognition network, we have just published a new book, Revealing Hidden Potentials. And that's the thing we are going to have in common today, this afternoon, with some lectures and some questions from you. And of course, I would like to reveal hidden participants. That would be nice. Unfortunately, I can't do it, but we are many people together, and we are participants from 16 countries. That's good. I hope that you will enjoy this afternoon and tomorrow. And of course, I hope that you can receive some new knowledge that you can use in your daily work, and that will be a change for people with congenital deafblindness. So let's go. Now we start. First, we will listen to Paul Hart. He will give us put this afternoon and this book, Revealing Hidden Potentials, in context. within the network. And after that, Saskia Damon is giving an introduction to us about different ways of observations and assessments. So please, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Maria. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a really exciting couple of days. I've been asked to give an introduction to the work of the Cognition Network and to put this webinar within an overall context. And I promise to use no more than 10 minutes for this purpose, so that Saskia has the bulk of the time to begin the more fascinating journey into the real content of the webinar. And after all, that is why we have all chosen to come along for the next 2 days. So I am a relative newcomer to the Nordic Cognition Network in relation to congenital deaf blindness, to give it its full name. And I appeared to join by accident when the group held a meeting in Glasgow in Scotland a few years ago. So I feel a bit of an imposter presenting this introduction, but I'm very happy to do so. Of course, the full name of the network gives all the clues you need to understand what it aims to explore: cognition, deaf blindness. And I'll say no more about these aspects right now, because all the speakers over the next 2 days will unpack these ideas in much more detail. But there is one aspect of the full name of the network that might confuse participants in the webinar, given that the first two speakers today, myself and Saskia, come from Scotland and the Netherlands, respectively. So, of course, both our countries have been invaded by men and women from the north, and for a while in our history, we might have been considered a part of the wider Nordic sphere of influence. But this time around, we've not had to endure an unwelcome invasion, but instead a most welcome invitation to sit beside friends and colleagues to learn from a network that has been developing exciting and forward-thinking ideas since 2008. And that takes me to a thought about the title of this webinar and the most recent book that Maria mentioned from the network, Revealing Hidden Potentials. Because it seems to me that by bringing ideas together from many different parts of Europe, we can all become so much more and can reveal potentials within us all. In Scotland and the Netherlands, maybe over 1,000 years ago, after the initial shock of being invaded, we grew and we developed. We found out more about ourselves. We added new words to our languages as we learned about parliaments, storytelling, culture, and boat building from the men and women of the north. And so it is even today. We have grown and developed further, when in more recent years, we have altered our ideas about assessment and cognition from the perspective of congenital deaf blindness. And in the process, we have written book chapters, delivered lectures, participated in profound discussions and debates, and we've learned so much more about the people we support. New potentials have been revealed in us, and consequently, all of the people that we come into contact with. It's not for me, of course, to suggest what the Cognition Network may have learned from inviting us to take part. In 2014, the Cognition Network published their first book, Guidelines for Assessment of Cognition in Relation to Congenital Deaf Blindness. That book presented good practice examples that drew on perspectives from several disciplines and connected theory to practice. This latest book builds on that as does this webinar and subsequent webinars to follow. They are intended to guide professionals working with people with congenital deafblindness when they are making working assessments of cognition and developing strategies to help these people realize their full potential. And we will hear all about that in the next 2 days. And now I want to think about the target group for today's webinar. The original conference webinar announcement suggested it was for professionals who work with people with congenital deafblindness, such as support workers or teachers, as well as professionals responsible for assessment of cognition, such as psychologists and specialist advisors. That could also describe the membership of the network itself. And for me, that gets to the heart of revealing hidden potentials. If we truly wish to reveal the hidden potentials of people we support, then we also need to reveal the potentials in each of us. And this can come about when we share ideas and practices across professional boundaries. Of course, at times this will present challenges and tensions, but it also presents opportunities to learn fresh ideas, have our own perspectives challenged, and to realize that the learning journey is best done alongside friends and colleagues. So just as we should celebrate the fact that deafblindness helps us to understand typical development in a more profound way, so too we should celebrate the fact that our different perspectives help us all to reveal hidden potentials. So now I'm going to hand over to Saskia, who will begin our learning journey over the next 2 days. And I can promise you're in for an exciting trip.
So, my name is Saskia Damen. I work as an assistant professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And I'm also a senior researcher at the Royal Dutch Cantalis. And as was explained, I'm very happy also to be part of this exciting Nordic network on cognition. And I'm very happy to share some of the content of our newest book, Revealing Hidden Potentials. So today I'm going to talk about differences in purposes, procedures, and analysis. So in our book, we show that cognitive assessment of individuals with congenital deafblindness can be performed in many ways and also by various disciplines. So not only by psychologists using formal assessment tools, but also by teachers, by consultants, or by caregivers that use, for example, observation in their daily practice. And assessment approaches can be very different, and that depends on the purpose of the assessment, but also depends on the professional's knowledge, the theories they use, the assessment instruments they use, and the analytical tools they use. On this picture, you see several theories on cognitive development that authors of our book used as a basis for their assessment. And so this picture really shows the diversity of perspectives on cognitions that are possible. And this is only a few theories. There are much more theories on cognition, actually. So you see Piaget stages of development, social learning theory, ecological systems theory, the transactional model, neurobiological approaches, and information processing theory. All these theories come back in the book. But since this is only an introduction, I will not explain this any further now. And I will go on with a framework that we present in a book in which we categorize the various approaches that can be used for cognitive assessment of individuals with congenital deafblindness. So on the left, you see on top purposes, and you see below the second row is about the procedures that can be used, and the third row is on the types of analysis. So I will explain this a little bit more in this presentation. In the book, we will also explain how these purposes, procedures, and types of analysis are related to each other. Then also today and tomorrow we have some specific presentations that in which we address procedures, and we will give you more in-depth information on naturalistic observation, semi-structured assessment, and structured assessment. So let's look first at the differences in purposes of assessments. So in the book, we give examples of assessments that have the purpose to get an impression of cognitive abilities, assessments that have the purpose to test an idea or a hypothesis, and we have examples of assessments that are used to measure specific behaviors. Most examples in the book concern assessment to test an idea or a hypothesis, or to get an impression. So there's not so much on measuring behavior, but it will be addressed. So what is the starting point of assessment usually? We can say that we see a lot of questions in the care and education and support on cognition. These can come from a lot of different people. For example, they can come from parents who want to know what the cognitive potentials are of their child. And also we can see it from teachers who want to know how to support the learning of individuals. And sometimes also we see very specific questions. An example in the book is that there were in a group home, there were some questions on how to promote optimal arousal levels. And yeah, that question was a reason for doing assessment in individuals with congenital deafblindness. So you see there these questions that they can be different, and they also determine, of course, the purpose of the assessment. So it's good to realize first what the questions are. What is the reason for doing assessment? Because if we would be able to answer the questions very easily, we may not want to do assessment at all. We don't need to do assessment because that would be actually a waste of effort and money, of course, if we can answer it. But the reality, when we look at care and education and support of people with deafblindness, is that it's often quite difficult to answer questions immediately. So to give you an example of an illustration of why there are so many questions related to cognitions of individuals with congenital deafblindness, I want to present a case example. This case example I found on internet. It's a case of Gideon with congenital deafblindness. And this video I found was when Gideon was 1.5 years old. And his parents also shares a lot of information about him because he's born with a genetic disorder. He's blind with light perception, and he has a severe hearing loss in both ears. And well, it's very clear that in this case, parents have questions about Gideon, and they don't know what to expect in terms of abilities that Gideon will be able to develop and how to best support him. These are things that they are discovering along the way while raising their child, and they are really happy also to share the things they discover and learn. They share it with the world, you could say. And And that gives us the opportunity also to look at videos of Gideon. And I want to share one of those videos with you. And I want to ask you to look if you can see some behaviors that are different compared to behaviors of children with normal sight and hearing at the same age. And I will just show you the video, and please, if you see something that you think is different, please note that down for yourself. We will not be able to discuss it, but I think it's good to note it down. Okay, so I'm going to show you the video now.
And this is why I couldn't find him this afternoon, because he had gone all the way across the living room within a matter of seconds. Until he finds an object which he stops and hits his head on. Oh, you're no fun, Dad. Fine. I'll go somewhere else. There's plenty of more things to hit my head on. Like here.
Okay, this was the video. So I ask you which behaviors of Gideon are different compared with children with normal sight and vision and also normal motor function at this age. You can take some time to write something down. And then let's discuss this. So on the video, we saw him moving around in the living room. And as you can tell, he does not crawl. What we normally see in children that they normal sight and hearing, that they crawl, usually. Not all children, but most children do. And he is moving around on his back. And of course, he will make sure that he has a lot of information by doing this. And whenever he encounters an object, he starts hitting his head against it. And probably people that don't know anything about deafblindness will say, well, this is very atypical behavior, hitting your head against objects. But what I think is that many of us will say Gideon is exploring his environment, and we see purposeful actions, and we can understand why he's lying on his back, and he gets a lot of information by doing so, and why he is using his whole body. So I think maybe a lot of us will say here we see cognition actually. But then let's look at the situation for parents of a typical developing child, because of course children who are typically developing show other types of behaviors when they explore objects. And children, they behave at a certain age a bit like all the same. So we know what to expect. And when we see children building a block tower, we know, okay, this is, we can recognize that behavior, and we can easily find also information on the internet, for example, on what children can do at a certain age. So we can tell, okay, when we look at a typical child building a block tower, this is intentional object play. Okay, so that is great because this is what we expect. So the situation is totally different for parents of children with congenital deafblindness because they do not behave as expected. But then where can they find information on what to expect? There is not such a thing as a website where you can find this. And the problem is the information that we have about cognitive development of individuals with deafblindness is quite limited. And also because they're so different, it's often very difficult to say something for them as a group. So a lot of reasons to just look very carefully on the individual deafblindness. And that is a reason also doing assessment to get an impression. So for a lot of individuals with congenital deafblindness, there are questions on what their abilities are and how they can be best supported. And these are the reasons also for doing assessments on cognition. So what are we looking for when we try to get a general impression on cognition of individuals with congenital deafblindness? So to understand what they do, to understand what assessors do when they are looking for a general impression, we have to consider first carefully what is cognition. Well, we can have a very long debate on what is cognition actually, and we had those debates in a cognition network, which were very interesting. And in 2014, we formulated some characteristics of cognition that I want to show you now. First of all, we said cognition is a mental process aimed at coping with and understanding the world. Well, this means that cognition concerns processes that we can't measure directly. However, we also said it is observable during purposeful actions. So that means that we especially can see, specifically can see cognition when people act and when people act purposefully. But we also have to consider the situation that the actions occur in. So because we also said cognition is situation bound and it is interactive. So it's not a static thing. It changes depending on the situation and also depending on the interaction of the individual with his environment. So that can be the natural environment, it can be objects, it can also be with other people. So we have to consider that as well. So now we have defined cognition. It becomes clear that if we want to get a general impression of how a person with deafblindness understands and copes with the world, we have to observe, we have to be able to see his actions. And we have to take into account what the situations are that these actions are seen or performed in. So what is actually the interaction that is going on? So we have to look at the natural environment and we have to look at the social environment as well. So then I'm going to say something about assessment that has the purpose to test an idea or a hypothesis. Well, there are some examples in the book on assessment that are used to test an idea or a hypothesis. And when we look at these ideas, we can see that these are often based or influenced by knowledge about what could make cognitive functioning difficult for individuals with deafblindness, but also what could support their cognition. And in the first chapter of the book, in the introductory chapter, we explain what could cause cognitive problems. And we use the literature for that. For example, So the first explanation that we describe is insufficient access to information, practice, and experience. We all know that sensory impairments of individuals with congenital deafblindness reduce the amount of information they perceive and also lead to fragmentary perception of the world. And in our book, assessments are described that focus on information processing and also the modalities that the child uses to obtain information and how this is supported by the environment. And then secondly, we know that there are specific problems with learning through social interaction and communication. So it's well described, of course, all the communication and interaction problems, and also that there's often a lack of access to language. And that is also why assessors can specifically focus on interaction and communication and social learning. And in the book, for example, we have a chapter on humor. It's written by Jonathan Reed and Jackie Smith, and it really focuses on social learning. It stimulates, in the example, social learning is stimulated and it's also assessed at the same time. And then thirdly, we know that people with congenital deafblindness often have problems with self-regulation. It's difficult for them to develop effective learning strategies, and they often do not experience the effect of their own actions. and are often not challenged to solve problems. And this can lead to passive and dependent attitudes and learned selflessness. And in our chapter in the child guided strategies, I describe how in a playful manner it can be observed if a child is able to solve problems. So some assessors do not want to test an idea or a hypothesis, but they rather want to measure the extent to which cognitive abilities are present or cognitive processes function well. And often these are abilities that are known to be difficult for individuals with deafblindness. And in the introductory chapter, we explain some cognitive skills and processes that are challenging. And here you can see some of those skills. For example, arousal levels, cause-effect relations and object permanency, symbolic understanding, perspective taking, and problem solving. And in a book, you can see examples of measuring specific behaviors. Arousal level, tactile working memory skill is used for measuring tactile working memory. And in chapter 9, you see examples of measuring adaptive functioning, perceptual, motor, and sensory functioning, and language. So let's look at the procedure. In the book, examples are given of measuring arousal levels. Oh, sorry, I'm not saying. In the book, sorry, examples are given of different procedures, naturalistic observation, semi-structured assessment, and also structured assessment. And most examples are given of semi-structured assessment in the book. Well, in order to understand the procedures assessors use, we can look a bit more on what is exactly cognitive assessment. And we also give a definition of that in our introductory chapter. Let's look at it now. So we say that we actually formulated this already in 2014. We said assessment of cognition is recognizing cognitive ability and evaluating the meaningfulness and the success of the actions of the other. So what we do when we perform cognitive assessment is that we try to recognize abilities, and we do that by evaluating actions. So that is an important thing, that we are able to see actions and of course able to evaluate it. So how can we do this? So let's look at assessment instruments, because these are of course very important when we talk about procedures. Well, in the book, a lot of authors describe that it's not doable, it's not appropriate to use standardized test instruments in the assessment of people with congenital blindness. The reason is that, for example, if we look at intelligence tests, there's a lot of visual material used, and test items are explained using language, often using speech, and also answers should be given using language. So these standardized tests are often not usable, or they need to be adapted. That is of course also possible, and it's also explained in our book. These experiences of the authors of our book are actually very much in line with what is written in the literature. And what we also address in the introductory chapter is that we have serious challenges when we assess individuals with congenital deafblindness. It's not easy. First of all, because people with deafblindness often have different experiences of the world. And that means that if we use some materials, if we try to do some kind of assignments, if they want to test something out, it may be not meaningful for the child. Materials may not be meaningful, or exercises may not be meaningful for them. So we have to look at what is meaningful for them. Also, test situations may not be optimal. If we bring them in a new situation, if we involve people that are not familiar, it may cause stress, or at least it may cause them, make them needs much more time to adjust to the new situation, to adjust to a new person. So that means that because of this getting used to this, which is totally different than a person that can immediately see a new situation and immediately see who is the other person. When we do that with an individual with deafblindness, it may not reveal his real abilities. So we have to think about how to overcome this. And also we have to realize that often standardized tests measure what a person can do at a certain moment and also what he can't do. And it doesn't say anything about what his learning potentials are or what can support his learning. And these are often the questions that we have when we want to assess people with congenital deafblindness. So we as assessors need to overcome these challenges. And how do we do that? Well, in our new book, we describe several approaches, but we can tell that observation is really the most commonly used instrument. So that is something that we do a lot in order to evaluate abilities, in order to see how successful the actions are of people, how they understand and how they cope with the world. But we can say that observation can be differently applied. Observations can be more or less structured. In the book, there are several examples of observations of people with congenital blindness in their natural environment in which the assessor does not interfere. So this is called naturalistic observation, and it provides opportunities to see the person in his everyday life, to see what his living conditions are, including the way the social partners interact and communicate with the person, and how much the environment is really adapted to that person. And Kirsten will tell more about naturalistic observation later. And then we have observation in natural environments, in a natural environment with some interference. And we call this semi-structured assessment. But still in semi-structured assessment, the individual with congenital deafblindness has the lead. The choice for the assessment, the use of some influence is made because the assessor believes this will give specific information on a person's cognitive abilities and functioning. For example, you could think when you don't see that the social environment is very well adapted, you can maybe give some tips for the communication partner, how to interact with a child, and maybe you can then observe if that helps supporting the interaction. That could be a possibility, or you could think of maybe a specific play materials can maybe are a bit more challenging and maybe can reveal some of the cognitive potentials of a person. And then we have observation in a structured assessment situation. And in this situation, the assessor has the lead. Actually, it's not so. It's not that the person with deafblindness has the lead. It's the assessor who has decided really what kind of activities are being done, and also with the idea that this will bring out or give more specific information on a person's cognitive functioning. And Foucault will explain more about structured assessment tomorrow. So in all the assessment examples in the book, you will see that an important step in the assessment process is the analysis of information that is gathered throughout the assessment. And we can distinguish three forms of analysis: open analysis, thematic analysis, and rating. And when we perform open analysis, there are no specific topics that are chosen beforehand to consider. And the idea is that what is important will come up during the analysis. And ideally, such an analysis is performed with multiple people enabling multiple perspectives.
5 more minutes, Saskia.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, such an approach fits well with assessment that has the purpose to get a general impression of cognitive functioning. And in the book, such a procedure is described in the chapter on grounded theory. When we consider thematic analysis, we can see that the assessor focuses on specific topics that are chosen beforehand. For example, he can focus on arousal levels, he can focus on problem solving, and this fits with an assessment that has the purpose to test an idea or hypothesis. And the book chapter that describes the use of child-guided strategies of Van Dijk describes such an approach. And finally, when we use rating, the assessor measures to what extent skills are present or not. And this is, for example, done when we use the tactile working memory skill, which is also described in the book. And obviously, this approach fits well with an assessment that has the purpose to measure something. A little explanation of the last type of analysis, that of rating. I show you now how Jude Nicholas, who is one of the developers of the tactile working memory skill, rated the behavior of Gideon on the video using the tactile working memory skill. In this skill, you can find several items that can be scored as either not present, emerging, and present. Well, Jude analyzed the video and first describes what he saw, the concrete behaviors. He saw that Gideon finds an object, stops and hits his head on it, and also searches for more places, more objects to hit his head on. And then he compared it with the items of the skill, and his conclusion was that actually item 5 is present. Gideon uses active touch and motion to locate an object in the immediate surroundings. So what is nice of this skill is that you can rate this as present, and then later on, if Gideon grows older, you can actually repeat filling in the skill using a video, and then you could maybe see if he is able to score on more items of the tactile working memory skill. Okay, then the last slide. This was just an introduction to the different purposes, procedures, and types of analysis that we can use for the assessment of cognition of individuals with congenital deafblindness. And well, maybe you can now have the impression that, oh my God, there's so much possible, there's so many differences. Yes, there are differences and there are very different perspectives on cognitive assessment, but we can tell also that there are similarities, there's commonality in the approaches, because the general aim of the assessors is to reveal the potentials of individuals with congenital deafblindness. And examples in the book show that the assessors search for situations that are optimal as possible, or they try to optimize the situation to give the person the opportunity to show his potentials in coping with and understanding the world. So assessors look for and build on strengths, wanting to see what the individual is able to achieve. And many assessors also look for strategies that support learning as a basis for intervention. So I hope to give you some idea of the book with this little presentation. And I will address later on, I will say more about semi-structured observation. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you so much, Saskia, for this. And now we are very curious about the rest from the book that will be presented today and tomorrow. Thank you also, Paul Hart, for giving us the context to both the network and the book. And me, who has been attending for some years, I got a nice picture of it from a new perspective. Thank you, Paul. As maybe you have seen that all the presentations will be sent out to you after this webinar or after tomorrow, so you will receive them. Remember to write down your questions if you have got anyone. We will save them until the end of this day and until tomorrow, but you can write them down during the presentations. As Saskia said, we are now going through different perspectives, procedures, and analysis. We start with naturalistic observations and assessment, and that will be Kirsten Costain who will guide us through that part. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to talk about the least structured end of the scale. As Saskia was describing, we have a spectrum that is figured in the book. I need to maybe just clarify a little bit about what we mean by naturalistic observation and analysis, which is what I should have written here, changed it a bit earlier. When we talk about naturalistic observation, we're talking about observation without too much of an agenda or preconceptions. We always have preconceptions, but we try to keep these out of the way so that we can look at potentials in the situation that perhaps we haven't seen or expect to see. We want to be surprised. We want to find out new questions to ask. We want to explore. But we're also, within this naturalistic frame, talking about a more open-ended interpretive relationship with analysis of, for example, video and observation. We can use many of these video analysis observations that I'm making about naturalism within viewing video that we've already taken for other purposes. Video that seems interesting because we've captured something we want to go further with, but also when we are just in an interaction or happen to be observing there and then. So an open-ended interpretive approach to observation and analysis is what generally is called a naturalistic approach within research methods, for example. And when I say research methods, I will talk about analysis and research as though that's what the book is about. And the book is about, in many ways, a practitioner approach to researching own practice, how to make observation, systematic based decisions about new interventions and how to test those. So it has we don't talk about action research. Actually, I think we do. I think there's one chapter that does, but this is very much in that mode for the group that is more of an open hypothesis generating group. So the term naturalistic within science methodology comes originally from sociology and ethnographic research, which is the study of human behavior and culture by observing and participating also in activities that occur in natural context, so in situ, as they say, in the place. And over the decades, this kind of way of entering a culture, especially, has been extended to looking at the institution. For example, a lot of early research on hospitals and other forms of institutions. So the idea is to have a holistic and very detailed in the moment, there and then experience of the culture. And we can take that kind of an attitude into our practice and also into our assessment situations. Even when we're doing structured assessment, we can have in the back of our heads anyway an openness to that kind of observation. So this is the least structured end of the spectrum. I think it's a bit misleading to say it's unstructured because the structure emerges out of, as Saskia said, emerges out of the analysis that we make of on the basis of our observations or viewing, for example, of film. And I'll focus mainly on the viewing of film, because in order to go further with ideas about what one is observing, one requires usually film to work with, because these things are hard to see in their complexity all at once in the moment. So naturalistic research seeks to develop context-specific statements about the multiple constructed realities of all key participants, as Frey et al. Here say. And this quotation comes from one of the many, many sources that introduced a more naturalistic, qualitative, interpretive research method at the beginning of when this really began to be more common. Okay. So these three assumptions basically apply to this kind of open-ended observational and analytic mode. That phenomena should be studied in context. And this is, of course, very important for our area for reasons that both Paul and Saskia have covered. The idea is to be presuppositionless, and this idea comes in many ways from the phenomenological tradition, the idea that you are to experience something without having a lot of preconceived notions and setting aside one's previous knowledge, prior knowledge. Of course, that isn't really possible, but we can approximate it. We can try as hard as possible to set aside our base, our pre-knowledge. And this is what we try to do when we're being as open-ended as possible. So we can say it's observation and analysis without an agenda in the beginning. Naturalistic, though, is interpretive. So this is an interpretive, open-ended mode of observing and analyzing data, film, for example, that is always interpretation, because observation is not free from interpretation. In order for us to call what we're doing observing, we are always coming from a theoretical perspective or different ways of constructing meaning in a situation because we're human beings, and that's what we do. So in a way, being an open-ended observing or analyzing practitioner or researcher is putting the what of something and the why on hold. It doesn't mean that we don't eventually end up at explanations or hypotheses in the more informal sense, questions that we can continue to try and answer. We are to do that. That's what we have to do. But we try not to go straight for, what am I looking at? Why is he doing that? You know, we try to keep these things open as long as possible. But observation, as I say, is always interpretive. It's always theoretical in its way, which makes it also always a form of analysis. So we're always analyzing, which is a good thing. So the idea in ethnography, they talk about developing thick descriptions of what we are observing or have observed. A thick description isn't just a detailed one, although it begins there. We want to describe in great detail what we are seeing, what we think we are seeing, of course, but we try not to go into what things mean, again, what things are, but what am I seeing this child do, for example. And then we gradually layer this description if we're going to do a full-on analysis that will take us further to trying to develop an explanation for what we're seeing, which also, of course, opens up ways of acting, which is an important point to this kind of assessment. In many ways, this kind of assessment is very much what all practitioners are involved in doing from a day-to-day basis. We deepen this gradually layered description to include, after a while, interpretations of significance. So we're looking at what detail we can describe, and then we're beginning to ask questions and suggest ways of labeling these bits of information and detail that can suggest what they mean. So we're moving now toward interpretation and meaning. We also eventually want to think about what what we're seeing and defining provisionally, also as we are working with the ideas, might relate to existing theoretical concepts, also published research and case accounts. So observation in situ, that will say in the context there and then, we are often going on assessments as advisors, for example, and we want to be as open to what we can see as possible. So it's very important to both keep track of what we're seeing, jotting brief notes down, and then going back to the office later, not too much later, and writing out our memos, our account of the observation, so that we can use it later in a report and decide what we're going to, how we're going to structure things going forward. We will also have filmed, and it's there that this kind of open-ended analysis of film in the beginning is very important for most of the time when we're making general assessments of what we want to help support workers, teachers, etc., do in their work of support. So then an open-ended interpretive analysis of video taken in an unstructured, naturally occurring interaction is also another context in which this kind of more open interpretive analysis could be done. So perhaps we have taken a film of something that's just a regular interaction, a regular activity. We haven't had an agenda when we took the film, but we want to look at it more carefully. But also, the last context that we can use this in is doing an open-ended interpretive analysis of video that may be of a structured interaction, an interaction perhaps that has been set up to test out something to do with cognition, for example, or collected within the context of a structured evaluation. And I truly believe that this is where we really develop important information and develop knowledge for both immediate use and for advancing the field, is when we do both, when we do structured assessment, semi-structured assessment, and we also open for a more wondering, questioning mode in an open-ended interpretive analysis of data we already have. So these three contexts are where we would use this. So why do this? Well, to generate new ideas, to discover what might have gone unnoticed, to develop a good starting point for assessing progress. Also, since the last time we were there to assess the child or individual and to suggest ways of going forward with interventions. So a good baseline, for example, begins with a very detailed as possible, open-ended assessment. Also, we must remind ourselves all the time that this group of people with congenital deafblindness is extremely individual, extremely varied. So they have a huge, they're more different from one another than they are similar, as we know. And so this kind of rich, open, non-agenda bound assessment is an extremely important part of beginning to work with a case, for example. To refresh the gaze, and I like to call this the research gaze, but it's also the practitioner gaze, to refresh our way of looking at both the field, but at the child or the adult. I work with children, so I constantly talk about children. And about the methods we're using, the approaches we're taking, and so on. And also within that, refreshment, giving ourselves new things to see and look at. We need to challenge our own assumptions. That's a difficult task, but it's an important one. To practice seeing. Seeing is something that is a skill, and it is not only achieved technically. We need to develop our abilities, our powers of observation. To gain a more holistic impression by observing broader context, perhaps looking at the social situation the child or adult is functioning within is an even more important part of our understanding, so that we want to observe a whole activity involving also other people and elements that we need to do more of an open-ended assessment within. We're interested perhaps in what this person has learned, what they can do, but we need to observe how they handle a broader context than simply those particular skills or that particular learning. So we need a more open-ended approach. And to decide whether there might be grounds to challenge a previous perspective, a previous decision, and find a better alternative to an intervention or a better way of thinking about a problem or a challenge. These are all things that help us develop our assessment skills in general and help us develop our partnering skills, our support skills, and help to develop our thinking about our field. So this is by no means a kind of step sister to the big guns of structured assessment. It underlies really research, the quality of research, the quality of assessment making in the context, and it is an important dimension, even when we are doing very structured assessments, that we have in the back of our heads this knowledge that we also need to cast our net wide, and we need to look at a lot of different aspects of a situation, keep them in mind. So what is it? Well, observation or analysis that involves looking, watching, and noticing, but suspending the urge to create an explanation or a story. So what might be called resisting the pull of making a narrative or a story as we observe and as we begin to analyze film, for example. And that sounds easy, sounds obvious, but it is not easy. We are always making stories. That's what we do. And we don't know we're doing it most of the time. So this is a way of trying to check that tendency and to remind ourselves, perhaps regularly, by doing an open-ended analysis as such of film as we go along, just because we need to refresh that set of skills. When I say analysis, I mean most practitioners and busy advisors otherwise are running around doing a lot of different things. There isn't the time for a lot of more academic type research analysis. Sometimes there is, sometimes a project will be established and practitioners, for example, will get time and resources to pursue that. And that is a very important aspect of the book that we're really pushing, which is the practitioner researcher approach as well. So analysis in a formal sense could take, could use lots and lots of time and resources, or analysis in a more pragmatic sense, making decisions and developing ideas as in the time that one has to do it in. Often this kind of observation analysis is more focused on abilities and capacities rather than the diagnosing of problems focus, because which is a very legitimate focus. I mean, it's important to diagnose problems. It's important to look for areas that need strengthening and so on. But the open-ended approach is more geared, perhaps just essentially to looking at how this person is tackling an interaction or the world in general, and so on, with as much, in a way, attentiveness toward abilities as possible. That, of course, does not mean that one ignores difficulties, but that the abilities or capacities expanding possibilities for working with the person is very much a part of this, as indeed it is with all assessment, but in this particular form especially. Focusing on the virtual rather than the potential This is an interesting distinction that Postoraro makes in his article about affordances, looking at the idea of affordances, what can be found in the environment, for example, to enable certain kinds of actions, certain kinds of decision making, and so on. He points out the philosophical point that when we talk about potential, we're always talking about something that it lies there from the beginning. The potential, the definition of potential is that this is within the established bounds of what is possible, realizing the full extent of what's already determined by one's past, one's genetics, and so on. If we focus on the virtual way of thinking, we're focusing on, to a larger extent, the way that we can work within a network, an interdynamic systems idea of what the world is, to find completely new ways of dealing with it. And when we have that approach, then we can more easily see how the child's behavior, for example, is in fact showing a normal milestone of development. Saskia was giving an example of that to an extent anyway. That is example of Gideon is very much along those lines. He definitely demonstrates that milestone in his behavior. If we're thinking potential, I mean, probably not us because we work with this group all the time, but if we're thinking from a strictly speaking, a potential perspective, you might be sitting there as teachers used to typical developing children thinking, well, he needs to develop his manual abilities so that he can grasp objects and so on, which is, you know, absolutely a goal. But of course, he's already showing that skill by contacting things with his head and knocking them with the top of his head. That's more of a virtual perspective. So the psychology of observation, barriers to openness, of which there are any number, but here come the main ones. The brain in the wilderness. We have a brain that is capable of tremendous innovation and which constantly seeks to expand our horizons. It doesn't, but we do with it. It's capable of all kinds of operations and so on, and we are constantly creating new technological worlds that we don't quite know what to do with once we've created them, which is one of the social problems of our time. This is because in many ways we're still living in the wilderness. We're still trying to, we haven't caught up with ourselves in many respects. So the brains are wired in, if we are going to use the computer metaphor, tendency is to look immediately for patterns, not make up, but find meaning and make assessments right then and there, because our survival in the wilderness that we're still in depends on it. So we have an automatic, not particularly conscious tendency to make sense of what we're seeing. And we do this with our visual experience. There's many famous examples of this. The monkey on the basketball court one is one of them. We tend to let our expectations and our prior knowledge and our fear and our tendency to rush to meaning making guide us unless we deliberately work against that tendency. And part of this research practitioner gaze part is to develop ways of knowing when we're doing that and trying to check it, walk ourselves back from that. The need to be an expert. Well, you are an expert, you know, in a field which defies definition or total hegemony for any particular form of expertise. This is a field that has far more questions than answers, and the answers are always part-time and for a while, and then we need to find new ones. So there is a constant need to create and recreate knowledge and to be open, particularly in this field with such complexity and such individuality. But we need to be experts, we need to go in, we need to have ideas, fairly quickly about what teachers and support people can do. And if we're support people or teachers, we need to know what we can do with our child or adult that we're supporting and teaching. Or if we're parents, we expect the expert to have something important and useful to say. So we have this, to some extent, a pressure to come up with the goods. We have to be experts. And that can make us rush a little bit into developing these narratives before we should. And the desire to be more expert than the other experts. That's that I think is probably true of absolutely all of us. We want to be the best expert. Of course we do. And that's very good and noble and so on in its way. But we also need to allow for different expertise, totally different ways of seeing a situation, and other kinds of frameworks that other people may have to be just as important as ours. And that is a constantly learned and relearned lesson for the practitioner and or the researcher. Yeah, this is it's very much a barrier to openness anyway, this need to have the right answer. The discomfort of not knowing, which kind of goes into the other points here. It is not easy to sit there and wonder and not know. It's very uncomfortable. In therapy, taking the not knowing position is one of those approaches that has gained in awareness over the decades, and it is not a comfortable one. It's very difficult to be the not knowing expert, but important nonetheless. And pressure, practical pressures to act, to fix something, to get on quickly, to show that there is development and that we are moving in the right direction, or to get moving in the right direction, all of which are very understandable. So how do we do it? We need to work on watching and listening. Also, we tend to think visually, we visual people, looking and noticing. So watching, for example, if we're going to go into the analysis of a film, we need to watch the whole thing. We need to watch it many times, and we need to. And if we're in the observation situation, we need to really just watch and experience and let things strike us as we go along. Recording initial impressions, questions that arise, which are very usually signal a lot of interesting potential ideas, ideas that we might have as we watch. But we're not searching for these yet. That's the rushing into narrative part that we want to avoid. Description, and this is actually a really, really difficult point, and it's an infuriating experience to try and describe even the tiniest little interaction or expression of the child, movement of the child. When you start trying to simply describe, you realize how incredibly important and almost hopeless the task is in capturing even some of the detail that you're looking at, but you have to try. If you have a lot of time and resources to do a more formal research project, and one of these is described in my chapter within this mode of naturalism on grounded theory. And grounded theory is a very involved way of moving to analysis through from the ground up, as it were, from the data to a more theoretical explanation. But you can use many others, and you don't have to be as involved as that method might seem. But in the beginning, anyway, you begin by looking at what am I seeing and trying to describe it, which usually involves some kind of a transcription of a film, if you have time for the formal part of research, or noting things down and really trying to analyze things through this written description that you are trying to make of the film. So what do you see? So This is not easy, as I've said, and I think as everybody will agree. It is a kind of discipline to look at a film and not describe things from a theoretical point of view or an interpretive point of view. It's hard to just describe. So pure description is never just description. It's always theoretical to some extent. It's always interpretive, just as we remember that. But as plainly as possible, plain in the sense that we're only talking about what we are seeing, but also in a detailed way. So not plain in the sense of general, but plain in the sense of as truthful as possible about what we objectively, not objective, as objectively as possible are looking at. So for example, how is the person moving, vocalization, silences, patterns that we're noticing there, patterns in the sense of, okay, we notice that there is vocalization silence, there is certain kinds of movements that are repeated and so on. So we note those down without beginning to talk about their significance. Partner responses, anything else we're seeing, there's a wealth of things to look at. So we're not trying to answer the question of what and why yet. We are trying to describe what we are seeing. So again, as little interpretation as possible. We don't want, though, to have a minimal description because that is too general. So if we say something like the child stretches his left arm out to where the partner is sitting, that is a very general. That's a little bit too general. We also don't want to produce a theoretical description. So if we describe the movement as an action, if we describe it as an action, we're already putting it within the, giving it the status of having a particular place in a story about what is happening. The fact that it is an action, because within an embodied cognitive perspective, all activity, all movement has to some extent an intention. That's a whole other lecture that we won't get into now. That's a perspective. Then we would also call what the child or person is doing an action. But in this sense, we don't want to get into describing it as an action within the context of a story about what is happening. So such a theoretical description would be the child stretches his left arm toward the partner to ask for the ball she's holding. That's also a very general description, and it's a theoretical description because we're assuming something about what the child is trying to achieve with this action. So instead, a detailed non-theoretical description. Now there is no non-theoretical description, we know this, and this is by no means as detailed as it might be given all kinds of time to make it even more detailed. But for example, the child lifts left arm upwards from the elbow until the fingertips of the left hand loosely curled inward with palm facing self, reach left shoulder height, brushing shoulders slightly, then stretches forearm out toward the partner, uncurling fingers one by one, starting with the index finger, palm now facing up, finally bending the fingers downward while lifting the left shoulder up and rolling it forward slightly. He holds this position for 2 seconds. That's just a made-up thing, but it sounds a lot like much of what we spend a lot of time looking at and wondering about, because as we see more and more in the films and the observations we're making, we know that these details are significant, and we need to work with them, and we need to see the child's own way of expressing him or herself and handling the world around. So open coding, moving toward a coding then, for example, of a film, involves moving into analysis. And this is still within the naturalistic mode in the sense that we are generating ideas from the data. We're not coming in with theories or with concepts from other places to find in the data or to categorize the data using a framework. We're developing our own framework. It's not that this bringing a framework in and using it, like, for example, the tactile working memory scale is not a good thing. obviously it is. We're looking forward to implementing that in a much more formal way than has been heretofore. So that's very important. But this is going at it from a different end, trying to generate ideas and generate an explanation from data, because we are wondering about something that we don't understand and that we think is interesting. We want to unpack it in a way. So we start with the data, the film, for example. And we give codes or labels to what we are seeing, and these are descriptive, and we make them up. We might also want to use aspects, or rather concept labels from other theories and other approaches, but we keep these to one side because we write notes about what their likely connection or the possibility of their connection to what we're looking at for later. We're very interested here in describing what stands out and what seems to be very particular. What stands out? What seems to be making itself felt in our observational field? One of the best ways to do this is to look at what annoys you when you're observing a film or in an observation. And when I say that, I mean it. We do, when we're watching a film and we're being the expert, especially, and we're trying to come up with a sensible interpretation, there will always be something that just kind of gets on our nerves a little bit. We don't even know it's happening, but there'll be something happening that we can't quite place within the already forming idea that we have about what is going on, which does tend to be there, no matter how we try to set it to one side. And if you notice that, if you notice something is really kind of, what is that? That's so strange. Why is that hand lying there like that? Why is that big toe twitching in that patterned way? It seems, what is that about? Those kinds of things are really gold, because there lies a lot of interesting ideas and usually something even more significant than what one might have expected to see beforehand. Patterns, we want to notice patterns, again, without placing them into some kind of a framework right away, but we want to see patterns that seem to be there and to describe those. Specific movements, including micro movements. With film, we can stop and look and divide up the sequence in very infinitesimal ways. And that really is incredibly revealing. So film in many ways is a microscope type of, a magnifying glass and a microscope, depending on how micro you become. But it opens up ways of examining very, very fine behavior, if you like, activity and other aspects. Holding or maintaining a posture, for example, pauses, the way the body is positioned, and so on, as well as gestures, signs, conventional or cultural signs, and sign fragments, transformations, combinations, all kinds of different expressions as well that don't fit into those categories, emotion, and so on. So we want to look at now in a more interpretive way, but still not rushing into making up a narrative about it.
5 minutes left.
Yes,
Kristen.
thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
So we are moving toward an account or narrative explanation, and we are beginning to look along more specific lines if we're now proceeding to the next stage of analysis. We move then between the whole and the part, so the film and our ideas about the film, and back and forth, checking and asking questions. We shift focus from the different participants, one to the other. We look at patterns in an even more analytic way, more interpretive way, and so on. And we start to group codes, the labels that we're giving to different things into categories. For example, if we're doing a formal analysis, we will be doing that kind of thing. And the chapter describes a grounded theory approach to that process. There are many ways of doing this kind of analysis, and you don't have to using these formal processes to get a lot out of doing very, very quick versions of this kind of thing. It is actually a very interesting and I think a very pleasurable experience to watch film with as open a gaze as possible, and working toward these more interpretive accounts by trying to define what we're looking at interpretively in terms of our own more conceptual or analytic descriptions before we go over to what we already know, what we already see in other theory and other research, for example. So, concluding thoughts, which is just as well. Open-ended observation and analysis within a naturalistic interpretive perspective. You are asking questions rather than rushing to get to answers, which is a hard thing because we need answers. We need to move using useful answers and develop new questions and answer those as well, at least to the extent that we can continue to do useful things. So there is a pragmatic pressure to answer questions, but we need to also generate them and ask them more than we do, perhaps, all of us, because we do tend to get attached to the answers that we like the best. Also, we need to put aside our preconceptions, expectations, especially those previous explanations that we may feel are better than ours own because another type of expert has talked about them, and maybe we're a practitioner that feels that their own knowledge is not as impressive or as confirmed as that expert. And I think a lot of practitioners, as Paul was saying, the book is really directed to people working in the field on the floor, as it were, often literally, with people with congenital deafblindness who need to also understand that their knowledge is expert knowledge and that it needs to be documented and it needs to be part of the research conversation. Very important. Getting comfortable with not knowing, which is a real skill and very important to also being able to see things more and more being able to see more. Developing powers of observation, the same thing in many ways, but also including the specificity, the discipline of trying to describe what you are seeing rather than making a overly general description or an overly interpretive one that you don't even know is an interpretive one. Developing the clinical gaze, so that also the research gaze, so that you can see more of what you might be able to see, as it were, and correcting against getting locked into a favorite explanation too early in research or practice project. Also, when you have become a bit locked into one way of being a teacher, one way of being a practitioner or a researcher, it's a very good experience to do this on a regular basis, even in a micro sense, to challenge your own assumptions. So that is that.
Kirsten has been written 2 chapters in the book, chapter 5. She was also involved in chapter 7. And we didn't say it when you started, Kirsten, but you are working at the National Unit for Combined Visual and Hearing Loss and Deafblindness at Statped in Norway.
Yes.
I have to read it. It's a very long, long title.
I never remember to say those kinds of things, but no. Thank you, Maria, for saying that.
I hope you are ready for the last part for this day, the last, but absolutely not the least. And now we're going to listen to Saskia once more, and she will give us an introduction to semi-structured assessment of cognition. Welcome, Saskia.
I'm going to talk about semi-structured assessment. And in the book, there are many examples of this type of assessment procedure. Actually, the most examples belong to this category of procedures. Let's first try to think of reasons why assessors would like to use such a procedure. First of all, semi-structured assessment procedures can be placed in the middle of a continuum. Semi-structured assessment is assessment in which the assessor, to some extent, influences the situation in which the assessment takes place. And it's in the middle. So on the left, you have unstructured assessment procedures, and to the right, you have structured assessment procedures. And so the question is, why would assessors want to have some influence on assessment procedures instead of having no influence? And just to try to figure out what could be a reason, I would like you to listen to a very short audio fragment of a job interview, an unstructured job interview. And I want you to listen to this and think what could be an advantage of having no influence and not very much influence on an assessment instrument, and what could also be maybe a disadvantage of this. So I'm going to play it, and please listen to it and think of this question. Oh, sorry.
Rupinder, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
You didn't have any trouble finding us, did you?
No, it was really straightforward, and I just took the tube, and yeah.
Excellent. Could you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my name's Rupinder Nagra. I'm originally from Canada.
All right. Which part?
From Toronto.
All right.
Yeah. Have you been?
I've never been. I've been to the States, but I've never been to Canada.
Canada's very, very different. People get it confused sometimes, but
right.
It's, yeah.
I know about the boot sound.
Yeah, I know. I get that a lot.
Everybody does that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, no, it's a great place. It's, yeah. So, from Toronto, and have been living here in the UK now for almost 6-7 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're finding this pretty warm?
It is very warm. Right now is actually...
English winter.
Yeah, the English winter. Well, in Canada right now, I hear it's like -30.
Really?
Yeah, minus. It gets a lot of snow, and January, February are the coldest months.
Do you ever get home? Do you ever go back?
Yes, actually, I was there during the holidays. I like to go back during the holidays, during Christmas.
You got relatives over there?
Yeah, mom and dad, family is all over there. So yeah, so it's nice getting back. So take the family back so the kids can spend some time with the grandparents.
Oh, you have kids?
Yeah, I have 2.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
How old?
The eldest is 5.
Yeah.
And our son is
Girl,
2.
Boy?
I can't remember. No, our eldest is a girl. She's 5 years old, and our son is 2.
Right. Yeah. Good ages.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's fantastic.
So this was the example. Of course, a job interview is very different than the kind of interviews that we use when we do assessment of individuals with congenital deafblindness. So, for instance, I, as an assessor, I'm used to have interviews with parents and teachers and caregivers. But I'm also used to often start with like a more unstructured beginning to ask people to, just tell a little bit about themselves, or to have a bit of an informal, unstructured beginning. But then usually after that, I'm going to ask some specific questions and I really want to gather some specific information. So you were thinking about advantages and disadvantages of an unstructured assessment format. Let's now consider reasons for doing an unstructured interview, and also advantages and disadvantages of that. Here's an example of a structured parent interview using the child behavior checklist for children between 6 and 18 years old. In the Netherlands, in several care institutions, during intakes, parents have to ask specific questions that are pre-planned. They are really structured, and often the child behavior checklist is used. And here you see 2 examples of questions. In the first question, parents are asked to list any organization, club, team, or group their child belongs to. and then also to compare how active their child is compared to other children of the same age. And in the second question, parents are asked to list any jobs or chores their child has, such as babysitting, making their bed, or working in a store, and then also to compare their child with other children with the same age. So think of what could be a benefit of such a structured interview, but also what could be a disadvantage of a structured interview format. Maybe you can think of it a bit for yourself now, and maybe also to compare it with the unstructured interview, the unstructured job interview. Okay, let's look at it more look at all the different formats now and see what the characteristics are. As you have probably noticed when you listen to the unstructured job interview, that the characteristic of an unstructured interview is that it's more like a conversation. It's very free-flowing, it's not formal at all. And there's also lots of room for respondents to bring in their own topics, tell their own story. And there are no pre-planned questions. So that could be positive, that people maybe find themselves feeling at ease and they can bring their own stories and topics. But there is also a chance that too much time is spent on topics that are not so relevant, and that the interviewer actually wanted to gather some kind of information, that he needs to have some kind of data that he needs to gather. He wants to maybe draw some conclusions, and he did not get that information. On the other extreme of the spectrum, we have the structured interview. Maybe you have also noticed when you looked at the child behavior checklist that these are kind of identical questions that are asked in a pre-planned way. So every parent of every child that comes to an intake would get the same kind of interviews. And you can imagine if it would be parents of a child with congenital blindness, maybe the questions are not so attuned to the situation of the parents, to the situation of the child. So that's really a problem with structured interviews, that it's not attuned, it's not responsive. And also there's a lot of focus on questions, and there may be not so much room for the respondents to tell their own stories in the way that they want, and to give in-depth and detailed information. So that's a disadvantage. So that's why, because of the two disadvantages of the two interview formats, the unstructured and the structured interview format, the semi-structured interview is quite popular, because it's an interview schedule that is adapted depending on the responses of the person that is interviewed. So you can figure out beforehand what could be interesting topics to address, what you want to know, but then you will just see what happens and what the person you interview comes up with, and then you can decide, do I need to maybe ask some more questions? Maybe you want to ask some follow-up questions to gather the information that you are interested in. And maybe things come up along the way that you didn't figure out before. You didn't think of asking these questions, but they're nevertheless very important and relevant information. The semi-structured interview is sometimes also referred to as a responsive interview technique, because the interviewer adapts the interview in response to the answers, the responses of the respondents. And there are also specific techniques described that a responsive interviewer can use to encourage a respondent to give detailed and in-depth information. These are, for example, probes, which are expressions that encourage the respondent to continue. And you can, for example, use nodding, or you can say yes, or you can use humming. Of course, if a person is sighted and hearing. And you can also use follow-up questions in which the respondent is asked to elaborate or to give some concrete examples. So you already have some idea what the differences is between unstructured and structured and semi-structured, right? Semi-structured is really in the middle. Let's look at observation now. So as I said, observation is a very commonly used instrument for the assessment of individuals with congenital deafblindness. And also in our book, naturalistic observations are described, but also observations within the structured assessment procedure and observation within semi-structured assessment procedures. And I have to clarify this a bit because in the research literature, structured observation, that term is also used for observations in a natural environment, but that use a kind of structured way of analysis of the observational material. But that is not what we mean in the book, because we say observation within a semi-structured assessment is an observation in a natural environment, but there is some influence by the assessor. There are some interventions that are used. So what could be used? For instance, an assessor could ask the parents to introduce something new or to do something unexpected to see if the child recognizes that. Or you can just ask, do something that shows this or that ability. Then also the observer could interact himself or herself with the child. So that kind of influences that we see that assessors try to have on the assessment situation. It can be big, but it can be also very small. For example, I have a lot of experience with video recording interactions of parents with their child, and just doing some kind of tips or sometimes even only a question to the parent that may influence the situation a bit to kind of support the interaction. For example, I remember I once was video recording a mother with the child during snack time at home, and she was in the kitchen and she grabbed a banana and obviously wanted to chop it into pieces. And I asked at that moment, did you ever open that banana together with your son? And she looked at me and said, no, I never did that. And then she started doing that. And that really brought out or caused a very beautiful interaction moment between the two of them, with a lot of tactile interaction, and they were opened the banana, and it was a lot of surprise and enthusiasm that we saw in the child. So it was a great moment. Okay, so here is the framework again. And here you can see how semi-structured assessment fits in the framework that we present also in the introductory chapter, and also I presented earlier today. As you can see, the semi-structured assessment is placed in the middle of the 3 types of procedures. And the type of purpose that is placed just above semi-structured assessment is testing a hypothesis or an idea. The type of analysis that is placed underneath is thematic analysis. Well, it does not mean that semi-structured assessment can only be performed to test an idea or only to use thematic analysis. In our book, we have also examples of other combinations. But as I explained in my first presentation today, often ideas about what could restrict or support cognitive functioning and cognitive development of a person with congenital deafblindness are reasons for trying to do some kind of intervention in a natural environment of people with congenital deafblindness in order to reveal their cognitive potentials. As you can imagine, in such case, the analysis will focus on what happens then when applying this intervention. And this fits with a qualitative evaluation, and also it fits with looking for specific topics of themes. But of course, a more naturalistic, open way of analysis that Kirsten just presented is also very very relevant in such a case? Well, I think it would be a good idea now to present a case study. I want to illustrate how I use semi-structured assessment. And I'm curious what you think of this example, and maybe you can recognize it also in your own work. So let's present the case. The case is Sam. He's 1.5 years of age, and he was having a cerebral hemorrhage after birth. And since then, he had hearing loss of 60 decibel. He has hearing aids, but they're still trying to train him, and he's not accepting it yet. And he also was diagnosed with cerebral visual impairment, and they found out that his visual acuity is 0.2, 20%, which is actually according to his age. But he also had reduced visual field and also was not always that visually attentive. Another characteristic of Sam is that he's not working, and he's also using a wheelchair just recently. Sam is visiting a mainstream daycare center. He lives at home with his parents and with his oldest sister. And he visits a rehabilitation center. He gets therapy there, he gets physical therapy, and he gets speech therapy there. And parents are supported also by a home visitor, early interventionist, who is from an organization for children with hearing impairments. And that person is trying to teach them to use signs and also to help them in training wearing the hearing aids. So that was the situation before I got to know Sam. And then they contacted our organization asking, could you please do an assessment, because we have some questions about his cognitive development, and we are concerned if he may have a cognitive impairment. So what was the situation? They told us that they were offering signs at home, but he did not started to imitate it yet, and he did not show any imitation of social behaviors that other children actually do at that age. So they were a bit concerned. So he was not showing any imitation yet. And then they sent us also some videotapes. So we could say we analyzed those videos using naturalistic observation. And what we saw is that parents used speech, and they used the visual signing that they learned, and they used visual expressions, but they never used touch. Well, never. Of course, they picked him up, and they did it in a very functional way. They used touch, but they didn't use it to support interaction, communication, and learning. So they didn't use that. We also saw limited turn-taking between Sam and his parents. We didn't see any shared attention. And also there were some things about the environment that we found interesting. We saw that he was lying in a box with lots of materials around him. It was crowded with materials, with play materials. And also we saw that it was quite dark in the living room, especially the area also where he was lying within this box. There were very bad lighting conditions. So we came up with the impression, so we had the impression that there were several adaptations of the social natural environment that Sam needs that were not offered to him. And so the idea was that probably if we would adapt this environment, and if we would provide some kind of interesting experiences and supported this learning, that he may be able to show skills that are next to his current skill level. So that was the idea and that was why we wanted to do a semi-structured assessment at home. So where was this idea based on? So now I try to look back at why we made the decision doing some kind of semi-structured assessment. So that was based on our ideas, but where did that idea come from? Of course, that idea came from the information about the case. So we could say the naturalistic observation we did gave us ideas. gave us ideas about what could be restricting his cognitive development, his cognition, what could maybe also support this cognition. That was information that we gathered using this naturalistic observation. And then also this idea was influenced by some of our theoretical and clinical knowledge. And I want to explain you this a bit, because I think it's always good to be very conscious about the reasons why you select or choose some kind of assessment. First of all, the knowledge we have, the theory knowledge we have based on embodied cognition, which states that mind, meaning, and thought and value all arise from the ongoing interactions of a bodily organism with its complex environment. So we were influenced by this and thinking, well, maybe the environment should be optimized. It could be maybe that we could support the interaction of Sam with his environment and adapting it a bit. And then also our idea was influenced by Vygotsky's theory on cognitive development, because Vygotsky states that it's possible to support a person in developing skills that he cannot do unassisted, but are very close to the ones he can. And they are then in the so-called zone of proximal development. So we had the impression that maybe Sam is able to perform better than he can. He maybe can show some of the skills in the zone of proximal development if we give him the appropriate support. And then the idea was also influenced by our knowledge of cognitive development based on Piaget's theory of developmental steps. And of course, this theory is also based on the development of typical children. But what we know from this theory is that children at the age of Sam are in the sensory motor stage, and they are developing practical knowledge about the world, and on the basis of sensory motor experiences learn, for example, cause-effect relations, and learn that persons and objects still exist even if they cannot be perceived. And we call this object permanency or person permanency. And then we were also influenced by our knowledge on the development of individuals with deafblindness. We know about common delays and splinter skills. We know about what could cause delays. And we also know a bit about deafblind approaches to stimulate development and learning. And we know also something about specific adaptations for individuals with CVI, with cerebral visual impairments, for instance, using good lighting conditions, using color contrasts and yeah, that kind of things. And then finally, also our knowledge on assessment of individuals with congenital deafblindness. And here I would like to refer to a quote from the first book of the Nordic Cognition Network, in which we state that when the social and educational environment does not meet the needs of the individual with deafblindness, this environment must be optimized before any evaluation can be made regarding the cognitive abilities of that individual. Okay, so that was also something that influenced our idea and made us choose to do a semi-structured assessment. And of course, we discussed it with the parents and they agree. So they were happy to invite us in the home, and they were happy with us doing some assessments there. So I want to you to think a little bit now for yourself what you think would be good if you wanted to optimize the environment for Sam. What is needed? And I say here, please answer in the chat, but that's not correct. You can not do that, but you can write it down for yourself now before I start discussing with you what we actually did during the semi-structured assessment. So please think for yourself a bit about how could the environment be optimized for Sam. Okay. So I'm now going to tell you what we actually did to optimize the situation. First of all, we didn't start with optimization right from the start when we entered the room. When we entered the home, mother was present, he was there lying in a box. We didn't start immediately because we also wanted to start not be too intrusive, of course. And we also wanted to see how mother was interacting again with him. And then gradually I came in and also started to interact with Sam. And I tried out some body tactile interaction strategies. So what I did is, for example, that I used some body pointing. I tried to do some hand-on-hand exploration of objects. I introduced some tactile signing, for instance, like well done. When he was laughing, I was making the laughing sign on his body. I made finished with his hands. So that kind of small things I did. And I found out that he was really accepting my strategies. That was fine for him. But he also used a lot of vision and hearing, but it was also made possible because I really tried to be close. I was close in his proximity, and I offered also objects visually in his central field. And then at first he was lying in his box, but then we asked mother to put him on the table and to put a nice little blanket on it and put him on there, because there was a much better lighting. And then we only used one object. And I let the toy, he first noticed the object and played a little bit, and then I let the toy gradually disappear, and I waited to see if he would start looking for it and searching for it, and he actually did. By the way, this was all video recorded by a second observer. So that was very nice for me. So I could play and interact with Sam, and she could video record. And she also asked mother several times when I was playing with Sam to comment on his emotions and if he felt safe, and to comment about his well-being. So what did I do? What other strategies did I use? I was really looking for motivation. So I tried to see what kind of object he was interested in, what kind of activities he liked. And I noticed there were several objects he was interested in, and some were familiar objects for him and some were new objects. For example, the rattle was familiar and the soft toy was familiar, but I introduced clown's nose. And I introduced a mirror he found very interesting. And I was able to build up some play routines with him. For example, we were playing with the rattle on his feet, and he was moving that and shaking it. And I waited, and then he was repeating it. And then he would also bring in his second feet to make it bigger. So we had these play routines and start-stop techniques to see if he would imitate, or he would ask for more, or he would bring something new himself. So after this semi-structured interview and the video recording was made, I analyzed the video together with a colleague who was also present during the semi-structured observation. And we also used, of course, the info of the parent, information that the parent was telling about during the assessment, about his emotions, about his well-being. And we looked for specific things. So it was not this open-ended analysis that Kirsten described. It's much more focused. It was looking for abilities. I was looking for partner strategies that I used, that I saw that supported him. And also I was looking at what factors influence the situation in the environment. So in the end, we made, of course, some conclusions based on our analysis, and we concluded that we saw sustained turn taking, we saw imitation, we saw understanding of cause-effect relations, we saw give and take games, we saw that he was showing things to me, and also we concluded that he had object permanency. So we also considered what support strategies were helpful, and that was proximity and touch. We were very happy to see that hand-on-hand was possible, hand-on-hand exploration, but it would also be good to combine it with visual and auditory info. But he was also interested in that, so it gave also opportunities for him to also gather information using visual and auditory channels. We found out that, of course, attunement in interaction was very important, but also that we could stimulate his learning by showing and doing things together, by repeating things, and sometimes also to keep him interested and engaged by introducing novel things. We could see his abilities more by eliciting and compliment, and also we complimented a lot. And then also we used communicative signs on his body. And we saw that lighting, contrast, and also the amount of objects were things to consider in his environment. So what was our conclusion? We said we discussed this, of course, also with the parents, but also with all the professionals involved. And we said, well, if he gets appropriate support, we can see that he can show several abilities that are according to his developmental age. So that was a very positive thing, and that was also a very big relief for the parents to hear this from us. And they were very motivated to take all this advice into account. So let's see what the next steps were in this case, because after we discussed the results of the assessments, and after we discussed our conclusion with the whole team and the professionals, it was not the end of our involvement in this case. And that's why I kind of created here on the slide a diagnostic intervention cycle, because that was where we were in at that moment. We were, we could say we had the conclusion, step 5, but that was not the end. And after that, we formulated directions for intervention. So we discussed possible interventions with the parents and the professionals involved. And they also used these interventions, these strategies that we described for their own treatment plans. So at the rehabilitation center, the speech therapist and the physiotherapist, they use some of the recommendations, the strategies in their own plan. And it was very nice that we could show it actually on the video what we did, and they could see for themselves what the results were and how to do it, because it's often very difficult to explain it in words, what we mean when we talk about body tactile interaction strategies. It's, you know, these kind of terms that are very familiar and common to us in the deafblind field, they're not so common in other fields. So it was really good to show actually, because it's often very simple what we do, and people can do it easily themselves, but it's good for them to see it. And then secondly, it was decided that my colleague, who is a deafblind consultant, would train the early interventionist of the Organization for the Deaf in supporting the use of body tactile strategies of the parents. And that may sound a bit strange, because why didn't she just support or train the parents, coach the parents in this? That was because we thought, well, there's a lot of professionals already involved. And we also thought, well, she was the person from the Center for the Deaf. She was very interested, and she had already very good coaching skills. And we thought, well, it's maybe very good that she learns more about this, and then she can use it for the parents, and that no one else needs to be involved, because they already have such many people involved. And then maybe she can also use it for other children who have dual sensory loss, because she had more children with that combination with deafblindness. So we could have also opportunities to train her more in that. And then after approximately half a year, we were invited to evaluate the progress made with the whole team again. And they were very happy with the results, although also parents said that sometimes it was still difficult for them to think about the bodily tactile strategies, because of course it was so much more easy for them to only use vision and hearing. Okay, after having done an assessment procedure and intervention process, it's always good to reflect on how it went. And in this case, we could discuss this and think about how much the assessment we did was in line actually with the guidelines of the Nordic Cognition Network. And we explained this earlier. In the first book, we described a lot of guidelines, and then you could say the book that we now present, that now came out, gives much more examples in practice of how to do it. But let's look at the guidelines that we developed already in 2014. And if we were in line, when we look at the assessment we did, is this in line with the guidelines? Well, first of all, we can say that video analysis was used, and that is something that we said is a prerequisite for assessment. And so that's what we did. And it was also an advantage because we could share our video with the parents, we could share with the professionals. And you can imagine if you would make later a video during its development, you could also maybe compare it with this first video. We used the body tactile modality during the assessment. And that is also something that we recommended already in 2014, that it's the main modality in which to perform assessments. So we did, but we have to say, of course, this was all new. I was a new person. The body tactile modality strategies were new to Sam. And we only use one observation, and we draw our conclusions based on that observation. And then let's look at the other two recommendations for the assessment procedure that is in the first book. We said then that it's important to optimize the interaction dialogue, and that is also what, of course, we did. But we have to say we did it at that moment, and of course we try to support the parents and also the professionals in also using these kind of optimizations in the real world. So that was why intervention is so important, but we never did a new evaluation. We never did another assessment to see if it really was really used, if they really optimized the situation, and also what that means for his abilities. But that was because the parents were very satisfied, and we asked, like after a half year, we asked, do you want to have another assessment? And they said, no, we're satisfied, we don't need it. And we also said to them, if you need us to do another assessment in the future, or yeah, you can contact us. But that never happened. When we look at the recommendation to use dynamic assessment, it's a bit the same. You can say we used dynamic assessment because there was first an assessment with naturalistic observation. Then during the semi-structured assessment, we did an intervention. And during that intervention, we gathered also information on his abilities. So we kind of tested out some interventions during the semi-structured assessment. So that could be, in a way, a test intervention test model. But again, we didn't do another evaluation later. So
5 minutes left, Saskia.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If you want to learn more about ways of performing semi-structured assessment, you can consider reading chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. of the book. And you can find there examples of how specific activities, materials, but also partner strategies were chosen to use during the assessment situation, and how this contributed to revealing hidden potentials of people with congenital deafblindness. And I will now shortly mention 2 examples of semi-structured assessment that are described in the book. First one is an example at a school in Norway, at Stadpet. It was an example of Joe Gibson, and I'm not very good in pronouncing Scandinavian names, so I'm just saying, and his colleagues. And they describe an example of a teenager with congenital blindness, and they wanted to detect his cognitive functioning. And they first looked at what kind of situation, what kind of activity could we use to fine-tune in order to create more possibilities for him to show his cognitive abilities, and also to support his cognitive abilities. And for this, the activity climbing the wall was chosen. And it was already a familiar activity for this teenager. And what they did looks quite simple, but they fine-tuned the activity. And of course, they also videotaped the whole process and analyzed the videos to see his cognitive functioning. What they did is, for example, they moved around some of the holes, I should say, to make the route a little easier to start. The child was given climbing shoes to have a better grip. A bell was hung at the top of the wall for the child to indicate when he was finished climbing, and he could come down after that. And there was one trajectory that was a bit easy. That was the left side of the wall, and they covered up that route because it would not allow him to have a right level of challenge. So you see, it can be very simple, but it was very interesting to see what happened then, because they could really see his abilities much better after doing this. So you can say that it supported this kind of little things that they changed, these little interventions in his natural environment, supported his motivation, provided him with information, and also supported the right level of challenge. And then the second example, that was an example in the book on the chapter on arousal regulating activities. This was an example from a group home of adults with congenital deafblindness, and the caregivers started a project on arousal regulating activities. And they also developed their own assessment instruments. It was an autonomic compass they created, where they could kind of put in all kinds of information on arousal levels of their participants with deafblindness, and also considered what factors influence these arousal levels. And this compass served as a guideline to determine and assess the arousal level of each participant. And then they created these arousal activities at the group home to regulate the arousal levels of their participants. And one of the clients, one of the people with deafblindness, was Simon. And for him, they decided to do clapping on his body and chest when he was very much aroused, to match his arousal level, and then altering the clapping to a slower clap before finally showing to a gentle pace. So it helped him calm down. And then the second thing that they did was to give him an activity board to stimulate his senses, because they know he uses his mouth to obtain and access tactile stimulation. And then they created something for him that he could use, and use different objects with different textures, smells, sizes, and tastes. So also a very interesting example, I think. And then I come to my final conclusion. I think we can conclude about semi-structured assessment that it allows a person-centered approach in assessment, that we can use it to optimize the natural situation, and it can be used also to test the results of interventions to optimize the natural situation, which fits into a dynamic assessment format. It can be used to reveal the zone of proximal development of a person, and also video fragments of semi-structured assessment can be used for intervention purposes. So this was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Saskia. And the examples that Saskia mentioned you can find them in chapter 3 and chapter 6 in the book. And now we have some times for you to ask questions, and you can also write down your feedback comments in the Q&A function. And if Kirsten, if you just put your camera on, I would like to read the first question that has survived. How can we train ourselves and our colleagues to perform such assessments and to interpret the findings during the assessments? Would reading the examples in the book be enough?
I think that's a really good question. And I think the answer is that absolutely you should read the examples and be inspired and begin, because these kinds of things are learned skills as well. And in order to feel more confident about one's own knowledge, because in my experience, a lot of practitioners, most practitioners who've been in the field for any time, have knowledge that is very important, and they frequently don't value their own knowledge enough. So the idea that, I mean, one thing is administering a test that has been altered, for example, the tactile working memory scale. That's a very specific kind of assessment involving rating, and you would have to have training to begin with that. On the other hand, you could also read the manual and decide that some of these parameters are things that you would want to look for in your own practice, just on a more kind of interpretive, open-ended ish kind of way, because it's making you aware of certain skills and things that that you would want to look out for in your own practice, which is a way of beginning assessment as well. It's just less formal. So assessment is all kinds of things. It can, on a purely pragmatic level, it's how we approach our day-to-day practice and see how things are functioning or not functioning. It's alerting ourselves to new things to look for, things to try intervention-wise. Saskia mentions many interventions that we would put into place in an observation to develop a good baseline, like I was talking about, and also to continue to evaluate progress. And these are things that everyone can do and should do in practice, and does do, really. I mean, practitioners do these things all the time in one way. The difference here is that we're being very more, also these examples are more systematic, and they have, there are specific questions that need to be answered, or there is a desire to learn as much as possible going into a case, for example. But that's a long answer, but absolutely, I think people should set in motion their own trying out of these kinds of interventions. The important thing is to be systematic, to have the reasons why you are doing something fairly clear, even if you don't really know, if you're sort of trying to learn more and more about the child. That's also a reason, and that's also important to look at. And evaluation is important. So following through on that diagnostic intervention cycle that Saskia showed in her presentation is important. Following things through. If things sort of get started and don't get concluded and they sort of disappear, then you're not really getting anywhere with it. But feel emboldened, feel confident, and use the examples and start to look at this in that way. I would definitely say that.
Thank you. It was a long but an inspiring answer. That was very good. Saskia, do you want to add something to that? Now you are muted.
So what I didn't mention is that it's always good to work in a multidisciplinary team. So I think it's very important to collaborate with parents, with teachers and caregivers, and all together we have so much knowledge, and we have to we have to do it together in a sense. Yeah, so that's something to add, I think. I think we can't draw any conclusions without the knowledge from the people that are very much familiar with an individual with deafblindness. Good.
Thank you. And then, Kirsten, would you please just reflect something about the issue of using existing approaches and frames in a flexible way to address readability, moving back and forth between the typical development and the congenital deafblind specific aspects?
Yeah, I think that that's a central issue for people working in the field is the difficulty of reading the child's competence and ways of helping the child to develop that. And Saskia's examples, also her own, and the book, obviously the book examples as well, show the importance of facilitation and knowing how to get to the child's competence and knowing how that can be seen starting from the position of typical development that is normal for children otherwise, and looking at ways of relating that to the development of these children, because being able to use that existing developmental knowledge and then showing how these children also follow these same developmental arcs. They may take much longer over it. They may have a more limited scope for development. That's another issue, but they do follow these normal developmental arcs, and this way of working is addressing, how do we show people and how do we expose the child's abilities, and that is a key issue for us. So I think this semi-structured approach, which links the existing knowledge and literature on research on children's development in general, helps us to show to show the competence of these children through our facilitations and our changing and our flexibility, as Saskia was demonstrating in her case examples.
Thank you, Kirsten. And now we have received a question for you, Saskia. In the case presentation, is the list of cognitive functions already in place? For example, object permanence based on Piaget normal development theories?
I don't, what do you mean with in place?
I think that it means that it's already there. You have seen that is in a normal developed way. I think that's the question.
Was the question if it's there? It was present in this case.
The cognitive functions already in place. For example, object permanence based on Piaget's normal development theories.
But I don't understand. Sorry. Is this a question about the case example or more in general?
It's in the case presentation that you had.
We saw object permanency, because what we tried out is to hide the toy, because he was very interested to hide it, and to search for to see if he would search for it. And he did. And that is also something that we can test. We have these kind of tests, Piaget-based tests for typical children. We do that kind of test also for typical children. But in this case, we have to make sure that he could really perceive the toy first, and we could really perceive that it was disappearing. And then we could assess his and wait for his reactions, of course. And then we could see that he actually showed behaviors that made us conclude that he had object permanency.
Thank you. Well, I don't think we have any more questions now, and there are only 2 minutes left before we're going to stop for this day, but we are continuing tomorrow, and then Vuko Einarsson will give us an introduction to structured assessments. And tomorrow we have a little bit more time for questions and feedback comments, so you are mostly welcome to write it down. Tomorrow you can write an email to me or Nina Stens. I think you have our email addresses. And with that said, I would like to thank Kirsten, Saskia, and Paul for this day. Welcome back tomorrow. And of course, thank you, all of you out there who has been attending today. Have a good afternoon and evening. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Nordic Welfare Center and day 2 at this webinar on revealing hidden potentials. My name is Maria Kreutz, and I am responsible for the deafblind issue at Nordic Welfare Center. I will guide you through these 2 hours we have together today. But first, I will hand over to Nina Stens, my colleague. She will inform you about some practical and some technical things.
Hi everybody, I'm Nina, and I will function as your technical host today. So I will try to help you if you have any questions about technicalities. Well, first of all, I would like to inform you that the webinar is being recorded, as you probably can see. And our aim is to publish it on our YouTube channels. Will be parts of it or the whole webinar. Questions can be asked throughout the whole webinar. You can either do it by the question and answer function or in the chat, which is open today. Written interpretation is available, and you can activate it by clicking on the CC closed caption function. And you can also choose the size of your text in the settings. If you have technical questions, I'm here to answer them. Please post them in the chat. And as a participant, you will not be able to activate your own video or your sound, so you are only able to chat with us or ask questions in the Q&A, so please do. The chat function will also be used to distribute some links and information, so keep an eye on it. And for the presentation material, we will send it out after the webinar. Thank you, and over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Nina. And as Nina said, we will collect the questions from you, and then we will have a part later today where all the lectures will be there for you to answer those questions. You can write them in Scandinavian language if you want to, if it makes you to feel more free, maybe. Well, yesterday, Paul Hart took us with him on a journey about this network and the work about the book. It was very nice to listen to that one. We are not going to do it today, but we are taking the next step today on this journey. And I would like to also say that we are more than 50 participants from more than 15 countries. So even if you are sitting alone with your computer, we are a good team together today, all of us. Let us begin. And this part, Vuko Einarsson will guide us through, and the title of her presentation is Introduction to Structured Assessment from a Psychologist Perspective. I will now hand over to you, Vuko.
Thank you, Maria, for the presentation. And it's nice to be here, even if I can't see you. Hopefully you can hear me now. My name is Vuko Einarsson, and I'm a psychologist and a psychotherapist. And this presentation is focused on how psychological assessment can support development in individuals with deafblindness. It is based on a work that was published in August of a work group with 4 other psychologists, Lynn Skye, Tina Bendiksen, Emmy Tomi, and Elena Haag. We are part of the Cognition Network that is organized through the Nordic Welfare Center. I go back. We are clinical psychologists from Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, working in the deafblind field. In this context, the word clinical refers to working with individuals in real-life situations, striving to understand the relationship and the connections between brain, mind, body, and behavior, together with relevant theories and perspectives. This work we have done has focused on early congenital deafblindness. Individuals with congenital deafblindness are a heterogeneous group. They are on a spectrum. The severity of deafblindness varies, as well as other conditions they can have, which in different way affect their opportunities for development and health.
Vuko, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Would you please just put your microphone a little bit from your mouth? Just a little bit. Yes?
Is it okay now?
Just a little bit more, please. No, I think it's better.
Can you hear me now better?
Yes, much better. Thank you, Vuko.
Thank you, Maria. I don't remember really where I was, but I was saying something about the spectrum, that the severity of deafblindness varies, as well as other conditions they can have. And that we can see that this affects their opportunities for development and health. In our clinical practice, we all have experienced a lack of systematic assessment of the children and youth who are deafblind. The agenda for this presentation will be, I will talk about the who, the assessed and the assessor, why psychological assessment, and what do we get when assessing, and how do we get it. Who are we assessing? This presentation has focused on children and adolescents' development, but also some words about the assessor's influence. Assessment is bidirectional. We respond to the child's reaction and the child responds to us. We spend time and effort to get contact with the child and to accommodate the assessment to the child in different ways. When assessing the child, you also assess the environment in different degrees. For example, what in the environment facilitates the development. There is always an issue that causes assessment. For example, questions from parents and schools. Parents are often struggling to get a holistic evaluation of their child's development and specific challenges. Parents and healthcare require diagnostics from medical doctors and psychologists. Assessment is a tool to support learning and development, to get knowledge about the child's learning strategies, for example. Our experience is that many individuals with deafblindness can be misunderstood and that their abilities are often underestimated, sometimes overestimated. We can sometimes hear that assessment is difficult or not possible with individuals with deafblindness. We think that all individuals have the right to be assessed. No one should be perceived as non-testable. In this presentation, I will present cases that are all anonymized. I will talk about John, a 10-year-old boy with deafblindness, autism, and intellectual disability, and how assessment contributed in that his school got more information and how they could challenge and support him. For example, working with iPad and different apps, with singing and movement, all these activities helped the school to achieve frequent situations where they could have shared attention with him and where John could show more of his abilities and school could use this information in supporting his school and development. Short about theories. Psychological assessment is theory-driven. We have chosen to highlight 3 theories that we consider helpful. These give important guidance in the cognitive assessment process. First, a little bit about Piaget's stage theory, which with a focus on sensorimotoric functioning. The theory can contribute in the evaluation of development level in children with atypical trajectories. It gives an opportunity to classification where this can be challenging. Secondly, we are interested in the attachment theory. It is useful in reference to individuals with congenital deafblindness, since many have a rough start with several hospital stays and severe medical conditions, which often can affect attachment relation. Attachment theory can contribute to pinpoint factors that are missing and must be stimulated in relationship to further growth or quality of life. The third theory that we consider helpful is developmental cognitive neuroscience and neuroconstructivism. The theory can help us understand the mechanism behind cognitive change. It examines how the mind changes as children grow through the interrelations between environment and biological influences on the developing mind and brain. Neuroconstructivism highlights the process of ontogenetic development, and that tiny variations in the initial brain development can give rise to domain-specific phenotypes by proposing that basic level deficits give subtle cascading effects on numerous domains in course of development. In this perspective, the infant's brain starts out with biases that are relevant but not initially specific to process different kinds of input. What is domain relevant? What is dominant? What is domain relevant initially will be domain specific due to repeated processing of certain types of input. We can use the growing knowledge of brain development to understand and promote development, both specifically and generally. This model is a way to show theories and knowledge that helps us to understand an individual's cognitive development. And as you can see, there are many perspectives. We need to understand how deafblindness and other conditions interact. It is common that other simultaneous conditions coexist together with deafblindness. For example, medical conditions or syndromes, intellectual disabilities, autism or other neuropsychiatric disabilities, physical and motor disabilities, behavior and emotional difficulties. For example, simultaneous disabilities and conditions can be more difficult or easier to handle in everyday life due to cognitive and physical abilities. In our practice in the deafblind field, we experience a resistance to acknowledge comorbidity issues. We think we need to talk more about this issue. Families and professionals are raising questions only possible to answer by recognizing such coexistence. So handling comorbidity questions are an important part of the psychological assessment. We address these issues with the aim to expand the understanding of individuals with deafblindness. Here's an example. Lisa, who suddenly begins repetitive spitting and hitting. If not evaluating this behavior from different perspectives, such as neurobiological, one can easily miss important causalities and right medical interventions. In this example with Lisa, an epileptic seizure could explain the sudden erectic behavior, which would need special medical follow-up. Different school of thoughts help us understand a behavior. How we understand the behavior of an individual affects the interventions we give or do. What do we get out of assessment? Assessment provides us with the child's developmental baseline. It is the child's functional level at a specific point in her developmental trajectory. And her later test performance and abilities would then be compared with this rather than the normative group. Using the child's own functional level and profile as a baseline, you can evaluate specific developmental aspects and effects of intervention. The baseline is often a skewed profile. I will show you one. It is a snapshot of the functional level here and now. We also get information about facilitating and limiting conditions in the environment. Here is an illustration of a skewed profile. From right to left, it illustrates the following areas: daily skills and activities, fine motor skills, rough motor skills, self-regulation, social skills, language and communication, and also memory and attention. The aim is to give a picture of the functioning level in present time and in different domains. As you can see, there is a significant difference in the profile. For example, there's a big difference between the social domain and the memory and motor domains. It is based on the Danish Educational Developmental Description for children and adults with developmental delays. Assessment give knowledge and understanding of an unusual condition on an individual level and also on a group level. It provides us with structured information that can be used in research and in the understanding of the population who has deafblindness and the interventions they can need. We get the baseline through dynamic assessment procedure. This is a this, what I will present now, is a concrete part of the assessment work that I find exciting and often surprising, because you don't really know what will happen in the test situation. In assessment, you use communication and interaction. You strive to establish a safe situation before starting assessment. You try to prepare the child for the assessment. For example, visit the child, send a picture or a short video of you. When assessing, try to have a parent or a teacher or an assistant who knows the child in the room. The person's presence can comfort the child and support communication. We use standardized method with individual adjustments, observations, and inventories. Our experience is that it's informative to expose the child to a test situation. It always provides new and complementary information about the child's abilities and type of scaffolding needed. Standardized tests must usually be adjusted in different degrees. Strive to adapt the situation environment to the child's need in terms of sensory modality, tactile modality, auditory modality. Use video. It's often a helpful tool in assessment. Be also open to unusual ways to get answer. Sometimes it works better for the person to place a token or a picture than pointing to the right solution. Support the child's psychomotoric control and performance in different ways. For example, use a suitable work share. Physical contact can facilitate the child's work and performance. Two young children I recently met when doing assessment, both have no vision, some hearing, and physical and motor disabilities in different degrees. Both were expressing more abilities when they were doing work activities in the arms, sitting in the knee, or having close body contact. Both became more attentive. It was easier to get shared attention. They expressed more signs and imitated more. We interpreted that the bodily support they received gave them increased access to their cognitive resources. The assessment is based on interpretation and analysis of the information you get through significant others, journals, the child's behavior, and the test results. You use your clinical experience as well as relevant theoretical knowledge in the interpretation and the analysis. Psychological assessment is part of a multidisciplinary effort. You get the child's baseline through using the following procedure: medical history, anamnestic information, for example, information about syndromes, genetics, vision and hearing status, physical and motor development. This information is necessary in preparing for assessment. It also facilitates the interpretation of the results. For example, previous assessments give a picture of how the development has evolved. Interviews with significant others give information of the child's present situation and history, and the child's participation and activity in different environments and with different persons. We also get it through observations and structured and naturalistic, and through individualized psychological assessment. We get the baseline through assessing different functional domains like social cognition, learning and memory, executive functioning, language and communication, perceptual and motor function. The domains give a picture. Here's a picture of the domains and some more parts that we try to understand. The domains gives a picture of the child's function level in different abilities. And in reality, the functions are very much intertwined with each other. When assessing children with multiple disabilities, we are interested in the child's own baseline and development. Analyzing the child's achievement with a partner or with us, strategies used, how did the child profit from the scaffolding, give us useful information for planning further interventions. The general ability, IQ, is often in less focus. I will give some examples from two of these domains, social cognition and learning and memory. Social cognition consists of many different parts and abilities that build on each other. Ability to pay attention, proto-conversation, joint attention, imitation and turn-taking and play, mentalization, self-regulation, to mention some. Here's an example from a structured observation. Lisa, 4 years old, she has short syndrome and intellectual disability and restricted vision and hearing. Lisa sits on the floor and is spinning on the wheels on her wheelchair together with her teacher. They take turns spinning the wheel. The teacher suggests that they bring in different things in the wheel that give rise to exciting sounds. The teacher talks to Lisa both verbally and through tactile signs. Lisa follows the teacher's proposal and chooses among the things. And the play continues with different sounds depending on the things they use. In this structured observation, Lisa demonstrates different social skills as attention, imitation, engagement, and interest in basic turn-taking and social interaction. The teacher supports participation in the play by selecting an activity that suits Lisa and stimulates Lisa and makes her active. By bringing in new elements in the interaction, the teacher challenges Lisa and stimulates her social interaction. Learning and memory. This domain gives a picture of abilities like generalized knowledge, ability to learn, working memory. I will give you an example of how it can look like in the test situation. John, the 10-year-old boy I told you about previously, his school wanted an assessment because they wanted to understand more of John's cognitive abilities. They also wanted to reduce his challenging behavior in terms of biting and scratching the stuff. When John is working with school materials and Bailey scales, a psychological test, standardized, John differentiates different colors, letters, which he shows by pointing or by drawing. He counts to 5. He shows an understanding for size, small, large, and weight, heavy, light, and several geometric shapes. He puzzles with 2 parts. With more parts, he doesn't get the pieces together and lose interest. When John works with concrete materials such as toys, tokens, or geometric figures, he works for longer periods. He often looks for what material I have to offer him. In school, we observe that he comes immediately when the teacher tells him it's time for schoolwork. He really likes it. An analysis of the learning and memory domain with John. John shows several cognitive skills in the test situation: curiosity, motivation, ability to learn and memorize. He understands basic concepts and symbols. He has a basic understanding of the relationship between whole and parts. Doing puzzles requires soft, fine motor skills. That is a challenge for him. His visual impairment probably contributes to these fine motor difficulties. Some of the recommendations after assessment were to give John more of cognitive challenges in form of more interesting school activities. Sign lessons, letter exposure, writing and reading, and to use more motivating aids like an iPad in work. 6 months after the assessment, the school reported that John has become more communicative and that his challenging behavior has diminished. Oh, yeah. Assessment enhances the awareness of the child's resources and challenges. We see assessment as psychoeducational. It gives school and parents increased knowledge about the child and what adaptation support development, and can give the child increased self-awareness. In that way, the assessment procedure in itself is an intervention with a therapeutic element. It can give us essential information of individual interventions that can be helpful and motivating for the child. John, the boy I told you about here shortly, showed more of his abilities of word comprehension, development of basic concepts and categorizing when he used an iPad and did similar tasks that are in the Bailey scales, the standardized test that measure development in different areas. When he used the iPad, he became more motivated and showed more abilities in these areas. When he was asked verbally, he often did not answer. In the test situation, we do adjustments to enhance the performance. For example, when the standardized way doesn't provide us with the information how to further help the child. For example, it can be too difficult or it does not catch the child's attention. John, for example, did many tests together with his teacher. When doing that, he expressed more communication and sign abilities compared to when he was working with me. She had a better understanding of the way he expressed himself and could be more demanding with him when he did not answer. Some words about diagnostics. In assessment, psychologist stands on two legs by searching for the individual resources as well as finding and describing the challenges and difficulties. Describing and naming difficulties sometimes lead to diagnosis. Diagnosis is often a basis for getting help from the welfare system. It is like that in the Scandinavian countries. It can help both individuals with impairment and significant others to understand their abilities and disabilities. It often leads to an increased understanding and can motivate the child and the parents to try to use aids that can compensate or strategies that can compensate the difficulties. Diagnosis can increase the opportunities to meet other peers with the same condition, a way of normalizing. Others has the same difficulties and challenges as the child. For parents, assessment provides information on development and prognosis, and like the child, the parent can gain access to interest and association groups. Concluding remarks. In assessment, we search for ways to relate and communicate with the child. We search for resources in the child and the environment. We try to find and describe the child's zone of proximal development. We use the child's own baseline when measuring change and development. We always consider results in a developmental perspective. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Voko. It was interesting. And now we have got through 3 different types and procedures: naturalistic observations, semi-structured assessment, and structured assessment. Maybe I can just ask Kirsten, Saskia, Voko, and Paul to put their cameras on. Hi, nice to see you. And maybe some of you would like to start with something, some reflection about the questions and the thoughts in the chat, or do you have anything else you want to share with us? It looks like you, Kirsten, you are starting. No? You are muted, Kirsten. No? Oh, we can't hear you. Maybe you can find a solution for that. No, you're not muted now. Okay, maybe Saskia, Voko, or Paul would like to say something before?
Well, I just saw a very nice comment that one of the participants said that she hoped that more people, pedagogues and special educationalists would be inspired by all the examples and starting to do assessment, because they of course do already assessments, but they maybe could start doing it in a more systematic way.
Yeah.
Really like that comment, actually.
Yes, me too. Yes, Paul?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was interested in the poll that you did about who people were who were participating in the seminar, and I noticed that 0% were people who were support partners, and I think that's interesting, because those people are often the key witnesses to people's skills and people's potentials, and can play a really key role in the assessment process. So I think that's a challenge for us all, is to get this knowledge and the discussions over the last couple of days out to as many frontline workers as possible, to really just to help make visible people's potentials.
Can you hear me now, Maria, by chance?
Yes, now we can hear you, Kirsten.
No, I just want to second that, and I'm sure we're all in agreement. I think one of the authors of the book in the chat has pointed out that we hope to inspire people with the book to dare to assess and to use some of these approaches in the book. Voko was speaking about a highly formal and a psychological assessment using standardized tools is a very important, very specific and complex area where you have to have training, and it is to be performed by psychologists with intimate knowledge of the area. But the other forms of analysis are and assessment are available to use by frontline people and anyone who is working with this group. So you will see as well that there is an eclecticism in many of the chapters. People have used several types of ways of looking at intervention and structure and changing that, and that is part of the dynamic nature of this. So we hope that people will cease to be afraid of the word cognition, because it seems so very complicated and neuroscientific, but there are many ways of pragmatically defining cognition, and we've heard in these presentations a number of those as well. So I just want to second that.
And there is one participant who wrote that I enjoyed the way in which real examples in the book illustrated how assessment can work in real life settings, and I think that's very important when you will try to do it, as you're saying now, the inspiring of getting people to take the first step to do it. something else that you are thinking about? It was the first. It was a question just before the coffee break. I need to find it up here. It's about elaboration on approaches already taken in other practice field. It was exampled by ASD, dementia, complex communication, support needs, etc. And of course, we are very curious about what do you think about this in the audience, but also from you in the panelists. Do you want to say something about that? Maybe I think Paul. Yes, I can feel it through the air.
Yeah,
that's
it, yes.
Yeah.
I think Vuko touched on this a lot in her presentation, and I think from that psychological perspective, then there are already discussions and learnings from across fields, particularly in the field of autism and the field of congenital deafblindness. And I noticed some of the references try to tease out some of those. I think it's an exciting challenge for us in the field of deafblindness to reach out, to learn from other fields, and both to learn and to share our experiences. And I think the longer we go on in the search around cognition, then maybe in some distant future, we will come to an idea that all human development is typical if we can really understand it, and we use our experiences in the field of deafblindness, the field of autism, the field of dementia, the field of learning difficulties, to try and really find out what are the commonalities and the fundamentals of human development, and that would be exciting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can. Oh.
Yes, Kirsten, you can start, and then Saskia.
I think Saskia was first, so she should go first.
Very humble of you, Saskia.
In addition to that, if you look at all the perspective and the theories that are used in the book, they're actually coming from typical developmental theory. And actually all the authors are managed to kind of use that theory in their practice. But we have to gather, I think, a lot of examples of how it looks in practice when we look at people with deafblindness, and maybe then this is also a bit comparable to other target groups, like people with complex communication needs. But it's really helpful, I think, that we gather a lot of these examples from practice. We can really learn from that, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely with that. I also feel with Paul, when he was mentioning this issue of using insights from autism research, for example, we have had historically a very passionate desire to have people with congenital deafblindness seen for their combined sensory issues and not immediately labeled with, for example, a very uninformative diagnosis of autism, because it's very easy to see those kinds of issues without paying proper attention to the CDB. And I mean, people with CDB may not have be on the autistic spectrum, but they also might be. And I certainly have met cases where I feel that's a very important dimension to take in. Diagnostics, as Vuko is also also mentioned, there are lots of reasons, pragmatic reasons, and also pressures in terms of service availability to diagnose. And I think that we profit most by having a pragmatic and use value approach to looking at different diagnostics that might have relevance for our group, without needing to say this is autism and this is CDB. Autism research, the whole understanding of the autistic spectrum is infinitely more detailed and nuanced than it was even a few years ago. So there is a kind of caricature idea still within the field that we work in, even about it. And I feel very, passionately that we need to get over that, because we're doing the same thing to children with autism that we are, or people with autism that we are. That we don't want done to people with CDB. Also, there's an enormous amount of research being performed in autism, about the autism spectrum today, that is incredibly useful for us. Among other things, the issue of tactile hypersensitivity and sensory integration. It's a gold mine, and we really need to get over ourselves and start using it. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Kirsten. Now, I think that Vuku would like to say something. It looks like that, but you are muted, Vuku.
Yes, this is an interesting discussion, and I think it's conditions are so close to each other. We know more and more about that. So these clean conditions that we think people have, they are not existing in you have to more and more of the scientific field acknowledge that it's dimensional, all the conditions. We have all these conditions in us, more or less. So if we talk about autism or ADHD or all these neuropsychiatric diagnoses. So I think it's really important, and also to highlight all the knowledge that is growing about brain development, and we have so much to get from there to try to understand that, and to be curious about it, because brain development is all about connections. It's all about connections and stimulating. You use it or lose it in some way. So you have to use your brain, and you use it all the time, whatever you are doing. So I think it's the most issue I meet in my daily work doing assessment, that I think we have to try to in some way to balance the caring and to get stimulated and to go to school, even if you have a very severe disability. You have to have this kind of stimulation and try see where you will be in the future. But it's really important, and it's important from the early ages. You have to be really to come in an early stage, because you know already that a lot of things is really there. It's there already when a child is born, but then you use it. It's some kind of structure, and that what happens when you use it so the biology and the environmental stimulation is we need to talk more about that.
Yes, Kirsten?
You'll just have to jump in and stop me. But I was going to talk about this in the summary, but the other end of that, this absolutely the need to look at the neural developmental issues, but also there is a real need for us to really take seriously the establishing of the precise, as much as we can, the precise type of visual and auditory so-called losses or reduced function, because those terms mean pretty much nothing when you look at the actual complexity. I mean, it's an incredible revelation to start to look into what the different diagnoses are, what the observations are. So the role of what in Scandinavian language is called the synspedagog, the visual pedagogues and auditory pedagogues. I don't know I can't remember what the terms are in English, but these people who look at function and behavior and in relation to the medical details, all of these things are incredibly important. They can't be overstated, that you must have a better knowledge of what kind of sensory losses, how best to characterize those before you can begin to address things like cognition and so on. And of course, we don't always have access to detailed information. We're very lucky where I work in Statped, because we do have people on site who can help us tremendously with that, and within our own team. And yeah, it's an underattended to issue, I think, often because people simply don't have the access to the information. But we really, really need to look at that, because there's a huge effect depending on the kind of very complex, always unique and combined picture about the sensory issues.
And we also received a comment from one of the participants who say that, yes, it isn't only historically about the separating between multiple disabilities and deafblindness. So people out there have experience of it as well. Well, and then we have a suggestion maybe for a webinar in future to have a discussion about the word cognition and the term cognition, the knowledge about cognition, maybe to have a webinar about understanding cognition. Now I see that Saskia wants to say something.
Well, actually, that's something that we did a lot. We did a lot of discussions, and of course, it's good to keep on the discussions, because we can have multiple perspectives. As I said in the introduction, we also created with the Cognition Network a more pragmatic cognition, as I was referring to, and I think that makes it more accessible in a way by just saying. It's about mental processes that aim to that people that we see in people that have to do with coping and understanding the world, observe it in actions, in everyday actions, and that makes it accessible. And it's important to realize that it's also dynamic. So it's always, the person is always in interaction with something, with objects, with this environment, and we have to take that all into account. And can look, of course, on specific things like arousal. We can look at specific abilities, and we have a lot of theories that help us in kind of understanding what kind of things we can look for. But it's quite complex, and we try that also to kind of share that knowledge already also in the first book. But it's good to keep on sharing this and discussing it, and also. Maybe we have to help people also in coming with their own examples and yeah. So it's interesting, but it's also complex. It's simple and it's complex at the same time, I think.
Yes. So I think that then we will go to the part who is the summary of yesterday and today, but all participants, you are free to write in questions again, because then I can interrupt Kirsten. She promised me to do that. And then we can have some more minutes for it if something come up on your mind. And before I hand over to Kirsten, I also know I received an answer that some of you want to have vanilla in your coffee. So I have to note that as well. Okay, Kirsten, please give us a summary for those days.
Well, yes, I'm not going to go through to summarize the talks precisely, but I've picked out certain issues that have been touched on. I think we've had excellent coverage of the main topics, so that going into reading the book, one can be alerted to looking for more specificity about that within the book chapters. Paul started things off by talking about working assessments, and as Saskia's case examples and the examples and comments of Vuokko emphasize, the business of assessing also is a kind of bidirectional activity. We develop interventions through assessment, and we need to develop interventions to assess, to reveal abilities and capacities. So it is a very, very fertile way to approach practice. And I was kind of trying to suggest with my topic on the naturalistic, or the more open-ended interpretive way of going about it, that the assessment or the research on own practice, for example, mode is something you can use on a day-to-day basis without having to do always to do it within the context of a formal assessment. So there are two things here. One is the need, as Vuokko and Saskia have spoken about, for systematicity. A systematic assessment is important. So we need to have these differently structured, different levels of structure, but systematic approaches to assessment. Basic things like developing a good baseline, going in, finding a set of interventions to test out, and then evaluating, and then going back into the cycle, as Saskia spoke about in her piece. But also the need to develop an awareness of what we can look for, how we can see things, how we can think about things, so that we can have greater sensitivity in our work from day to day, whether we're advisors or support partners or teachers. And doing this, having a kind of assessment state of mind, a questioning state of mind, is important. So the word hypothesis, often, like cognition, often strikes fear into the hearts of lesser mortals than psychologists. And because it's a very specific, within the scientific method, it's a highly specific kind of question, if you like, to ask. But we can think about hypothesis in a more, or hypothesis asking, posing, testing in a more pragmatic way, simply as the asking of questions and testing out whether a provisional answer to a question has an effect or not, and what kind of effect, and so on. So as we engage in dynamic assessment, whether we're doing it in a very informal day-to-day kind of way, just seeing what's going on and trying things out in the moment, which is a more naturalistic kind of way to work, or we're doing more structured assessments in a more formal manner, we can have that hypothesis testing habit of mind as well. So the book, I think, gives examples of putting these kinds of ideas into play at different levels of engagement with the day-to-day of practice, and the other end of the scale, which is the more diagnostically, or rather the need to make formal statements about capacities and potential. So I think that that we've touched on these things, and it may still be confusing, this issue of structure, semi-structured, structured. But I think the book is very, very accessible, and will show those details very well. Yeah, the issue of using milestones and standardized measures, and the way things are described in theories of development, and then translating the way in which people with CDB demonstrate these functions and these developmental milestones is incredibly important. So the issue of readability is what we're always addressing. so that the potentials can be seen and appropriate interventions developed. Yeah, cognition as intentional behavior or purposeful actions, and just the presence of intentionality. There are some scales of intentionalities that are observation. It's an interesting observational. It's an interesting concept. It's a very complex issue. But I think as well within that, a general understanding of people's, of the children, for example, that we're looking at at early stages of the beginning of exploration. What kind of exploratory strategies are being used is another pragmatic way of talking about cognitive activity, the child's thinking and learning. Yeah, so systematicity, but also a multi-perspectival interdisciplinary approach is to be preferred, because this is a complex area, and there are plenty of connections to other complex areas, and as long as there is a balance between engaging different perspectives and following through in a systematic way, that is, it will be a strength to be multi-perspectival. Problems can occur in practice, for example, when there are many cooks and a lot of good ideas being performed in piecemeal ways now and then, depending on who's working with the child. I'm speaking more about practice settings. And it can be a challenge to kind of unite a team around a certain way of doing something to test it out. Not always, but I mean, it can be a difficult thing, that balance to strike between many perspectives. But as long as people are being clear about why a perspective is viewed as potentially useful and how to test out an intervention based on that perspective, then that is going to be a clear project, whether it's an informal one or more formal one. So I think the issue of how to be systematic, people want methods, they want as we say here, the recipe. They want to know what will work, what they should do. And the point is that is a hard question to answer, because there is no one method. There is no way of knowing for sure if one has done all that one can. One certainly probably hasn't. But the idea of being methodical refers simply to being systematic, to having a plan and following it through, and then seeing, well, that needs changing, that needs altering, another plan needs to be put into place, or more often this needs tweaking, this needs changing a bit, and we'll have to see. We have a dynamic process. We'll continue to be flexible with the results of interventions, and that cycle of test, intervention, retest, and so on that Saskia was talking about. So method is not magic. There is no magic solution, but there are plenty of ideas, and systematicity means putting things into play for good reasons that you have clarified, and doing things methodically and then evaluating. That's really what it's about. And there can be many, many ways of doing that. I think one of the main issues that we have tried to show in the book, and I think that we've mentioned many times in these 2 days, is the importance of facilitation. So facilitating things so that the child can show, or the person, the adult, can show their capacities and their potentials. Whether we're designing interventions or intervening or observing to assess, without the right facilitation, these things do not get seen. And it's very important to constantly have that front and center. there can be misunderstandings about how testing must be in a way free of too much facilitation. You know, there is that kind of what's the word for it? To be sound, the test situation must be this way and that way, and the influence of the tester. This is a kind of, you know, from the experiment, the sort of classic idea of not wanting to bias the results and so on. But of course, we see that the opposite is the case here. We need to be clear about potential, how we are influencing the situation as assessors, because we always will be, but we need to look at how to make things optimal for the child or the adult, and that's what we are talking about in the book, different ways of doing that. Yeah, let's see now. Yeah, this issue of underestimation is one way that something we experience more perhaps than overestimation, but overestimation is also an issue. So it's very good that Voko mentioned that. We don't want to, for example, children who do have or adults, I work with children, so I constantly talk about them, who have a fairly good vocabulary, for example. Perhaps they have vocal speech or sign language, or they have both. They have a certain amount of vocabulary, but the conceptual content of those words can be very, it can be apparent that they can say things that they don't, that seem to mean something, one thing. I'm thinking of children with a fair amount of fluency who may give the indication that they have a conceptual understanding that is cultural, when in fact they don't. They have an ability to repeat things that may give people the idea that they are able to understand that particular within a teaching situation, for example, that they understand a topic, and they need a different approach because the content, the conceptual development is different in their repertoire. I'm probably not making much sense here, but so it is important not to overestimate either. Children can be excluded from important help when that occurs, although it is mostly the underestimation that we struggle with. Yeah, diagnostic complexity is a huge issue. This issue of comorbidity, it's a very emotional issue, and it's a very real danger that children and adults receive these labels or diagnoses given as labeling. And for example, the transition from the child, a children's follow-up services at the hospital to when the person is moving to life as an adult, there will be this kind of series of meetings looking at diagnostic labels that need to be there because the services aren't released without these decisions being made. And yet the learning disabled labels are not adequate to define what the people actually will need and what they are capable of. So this is a very important and very complex issue, but we do not serve these people without being honest about the complexity of their situations and what they may be struggling with in addition to or as part of the congenital deafblindness. And as Voko says, there is increasingly, we can't see these things as separate worlds anymore.
5 minutes left, Kirsten.
Probably, yes. Yeah, I think we've actually discussed, I'm just thinking if I have anything. Yeah, Right. I think that one of the important things is that, just get rid of that on my screen, is that interpretation's always part of any kind of testing, whether you are using a standardized test on a normal population of children who are 6 years old or whatever. There is always, and the results will be a statistical profile, for example. There's always going to be interpretation. Interpretation always comes into it, even in large scale statistical bodies of data that come out. There will always be a high level of interpretation. So interpretation isn't a bad thing. It's a necessary thing. It just needs to be, we need to be sober and about our edrulle in the Scandinavian languages, about our interpretations and their fallibility. So that is an important issue. It kind of speaks to the general issue, which I think the book does a good job of showing us. It demystifies the book and the examples there, demystifies the idea of method, what is cognition, and the role of interpretation. It makes it more, I think, clearer and more accessible to the general reader as well as the expert in this field. Right, and we discussed the importance of detailed knowledge of the sensory function deficits and the way that they appear, and basically the importance of a detailed, rich baseline from which to work and assess things is extremely important. And I think all of us have mentioned different aspects of that and different ways that can look, what kind of a baseline can look. My presentation was meant to be as well a general reflection on the need for an open and questioning attitude that we can have with us, even when we're doing very specific testing procedures or having a lot more, working more within a holistic perspective, a theoretical perspective, that it is very helpful and important to keep an open mind and to know how to keep the mind open, which the mind in the wilderness, the one that wants to find the solution, is a problem for us all. And I think that kind of questioning, practitioners should never be afraid to do much more open video analysis, for example, with a view to understanding the situation and developing ideas and ways of seeing important. So I think that's probably enough for me.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I would like to ask all of you in the panel to put your cameras on. And it was very good that you ended with just as you did, because we have received something and it says, I really would like to start using the tools, ideas for assessment you presented, but I'm afraid of making mistakes using it in the wrong way. How is it possible to get a good support, to have a good start and get experience? And I would like to say just for the start that you are warmly welcome to get in contact with me with email, and then I can put you in contact with other professionals and other people in the network and so on. But I'm interested if some of you have any idea or suggestion to these thoughts?
What I'm wondering about the questioner is this somebody, it depends in many ways on what kind of approach you're thinking of taking. I wonder if Vuko would be able to speak, and Saskia, about the application of measures that have been standardized, that does tend to require more specialized knowledge. What would you say about that, if that's one of the concerns? it depends on what the concerns of the person are, what that they're thinking about in terms of using methods, because there are many ways in the book that are less imposing, perhaps. I don't know if that's understandable.
I think it is, but maybe Vuko, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. When we're talking about psychological assessment, I get phone calls sometimes and emails about how I'm doing, or they have from psychologists, they are asking questions. And that's, I think that's a nice way to ask questions and just to address what your goal are with assessing or trying to understand. And then I think just ask people who have been doing that or to come in contact with them. So I think it's good to have some kind of networking like that. It's like in Sweden we call it handledning. So we really, I think that's a fine way. I don't know the person who's asking if he's a teacher or a psychologist or whatever, but I think it's important to meet other who have done something before, so you don't have to it's more easy if you can have some kind of communication. You don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. You can, even if it's good to make the mistakes because you learn so a lot of them in some way. And I don't know the mistakes. I don't think you do mistakes. You just you learn something from the mistakes. They are good. You can't so you get information. You always get information. So I think just to take contact.
Thank you. That's good. And as I said, you're warmly welcome to contact me, and I will help you further to other people. Collaboration is always good. Saskia, did you want to say something, or you nodded because you agreed?
I agree with collaboration is very important, and I recognize that sometimes people also email me about specific tools. Sometimes I can also refer to, like, for instance, I'm trained in the child-guided strategies of Van Dijk, and I can refer them to the manual that you can read, and there's also very good video material that you can watch, and then you can really learn how to use it. But I also know that it still can be difficult. If you read something, it still can be, you feel a barrier of using it yourself. And then it can be very good to have some kind of intervision or supervision. And we have in the Netherlands, we have some intervision groups actually of professionals working in the deafblind field, and they bring in cases. And if there is no such a thing in your environment, maybe you can just set up something yourself. And I think that works very good. So I would strongly recommend that, actually.
Good, thank you. And I don't know, Paul, did you want to say something, or did you? No.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that on the NVC page, there is already some good information about other resources related. So that the first publication from this, from the network, there's also a more detailed analysis of the psychological perspective that Vuko and colleagues have made available via that website. And there's also the tactile working memory scale publication, which is available as well. And I think all of those things give people confidence to try things. And I'm reminded of something that Kirsten said yesterday about, in a way, recognizing the expert within us all. And I think practice sharing is definitely good to do, just to contact people on this participant list or the presenters here and set up local practice sharing networks. But I think the chapters in this new book, The Revealing Hidden Potentials, I think give people confidence that doing everyday activities, whether it's climbing, using water, whether it's using humor, they can all give the possibility to use everyday activities to reveal these hidden potentials. So I would encourage people to read the chapters and feel inspired to think, what can I do tomorrow to make this happen in my service?
And when you say that, I would like to say that in the future, the next year, we have plans to go more in detail in some other chapters in the book, Revealing Hidden Potentials. I cannot present a full plan yet and dates and so on, but this was an introduction for you to get to know the book. And we are going to deeper in it during the next couple of years, I think, because there are much knowledge in the book. And with that said, I want to close this day. I would like to thank all of you presenters for this interesting journey you took with us on that, and also all participants. Thank you so much for joining us. You will receive an evaluation and the PowerPoint presentations via email soon. And with that said, have a good evening and thank you so much. Hope to see you soon again.